Hello, everyone, and welcome to the premiere of League Weekly. Starts right now. Well, barring a few technical issues as we're getting the stream up, and again, this is why we're just starting. This is the premiere of League Weekly.
Held together with duct tape.
Yeah, exactly. There's still a lot of things we're figuring out here, but for those of you that are just tuning in, this is kind of our soft launch here of League Weekly, a new show that I'm going to be doing here with some friends. That's a little liberal use of the word friends. All right. 2 hours long.
I'll be your friend, Travis.
Thank you. My friend in China. We're going to have guests on sometimes. This week it's all Yahoo Esports folks. And we talk about things from, I guess, on a global level, but from a North American perspective. So, you know, there's a lot of shows out there that you talk about dongers, you know, or something like that. This is all serious, no fluff. It's great. Right, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, this is such a serious start to the show, right?
Yeah. Just with a few
hardcore analysis only.
Yeah, very good. Well, I'll go ahead and introduce my guests here on the show for those of you that don't know them, and certainly no one knows Mark. How's it going, Mark?
Nope, I'm most famous for doing a bad cover of Silver Scrapes. That's
true?
my claim to fame. You didn't see that?
No. When is that?
Please don't see it.
It was great.
When was that?
It was good.
Yesterday on the front page.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's bad.
Check it out.
I was kind of bummed. I wanted to watch the Smash tournament that you were at.
Yeah.
But luckily, CLG did not 3-0 FlyQuest because I thought that was going to happen. It's going to be P1 3-0.
Yeah.
CLG 3-0, and it's going to be really boring. But they got reverse swept, so very interesting.
Sad times. Well, we'll get into that.
Not for me.
And just
another victim to the high reverse sweep. I've been through it.
We'll get into that in just a second. To his right is Emily Rand. How's it going, Emily?
I'm well, thank you. Yeah. How are you?
Very, very good.
I was also at LCS this weekend.
Yeah. And did you enjoy it as much as Mark did?
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
I had predicted CLG FlyQuest to be like 5 games, but just like wacky picks and 70-minute games. So I was actually wrong on that account.
Okay.
If it was American Idol and you had the button to like send me through to the next round, would you have done it for my Silver Scrapes? Would you have given me the pass?
Like what round are we talking?
This is like the first one where like they show up and it's like pretty ghetto and like not everyone's there.
Yeah, because like then they send you because like you're entertaining, not because you're good.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah, well, I'll just take it whatever I can get.
Yeah. Very good. And then finally from China, all the way across an ocean, we have Kelsey Moser. How's it going, Kelsey?
I was not at NALCS this weekend. I had to be difficult and be at LPL instead. Like a really forced hipster, but yeah, I'm doing okay.
Yeah, how's LPL?
It was kind of fun. Yeah,
kind of fun.
Actually really,
that describes LPL
really
in general, I think, to most NALCS fans.
One-sided series, except for the last one, which was painful because first pick Kog'Maw was undefeated in that series, and that was hard for me to accept. So, yeah, anyway.
Oh, fantastic. I, by the way, am Travis Gafford. I need no introduction, I believe. Been doing esports for quite some time now. No,
who are you?
Yeah, exactly. No, I interviewed Doublelift, and that's basically my claim to fame. That's my big.
Been working out so far.
Okay.
Yeah. I was not at LCS this weekend, unfortunately. I was at I also am embarrassed to say that because League fans will just flame me, but I was helping to produce Avali May's coverage of Heroes of the Dorm in Las Vegas, where I lost a lot of money. And then I was yesterday at our Smash Rivalries tournament, which was our first big in-studio tournament all around Melee, and people really enjoyed that, so that was fun. But I was watching... thankfully on Saturday, I missed that whole snafu of a match in the series, but on Sunday I did catch some of the games.
I was able to make that series interesting by just trying to collect free clothing from the teams. So I got like a Dig shirt, and I got a P1 hoodie and some hats, and now I'm continuing that quest. I got a Yahoo Esports jersey.
Yeah. What were you doing to collect the gear? You're just like
I was
walking around?
walking up to the managers of the teams and saying, hey, I don't have any clothing from your team. Give me some. And it worked.
And that was how you spent your time that day?
Yeah, well, I watched some of the games.
Yeah. All right. Well, hopefully some of them, because we're going to be getting into that right now. Let's go ahead and dive into our first topic, which is, of course, NALCS Quarterfinals. Because, again, I just missed them, so you guys have to tell me how they went. But either one of you want to start off on Saturday?
Yeah, I'll start off. It was kind of expected. Everyone was thinking P1 was going to win. I think it was a little bit more dominant than we thought it would be, but it did sound like Dignitas, from what I heard about some of the stuff afterwards and just kind of how their play looked, that they collapsed. They got a lead in the first game, and then they weren't able to play around it well. P1 comes back, and they win the first game, and then they have this nasty LeBlanc with the new Gunblade build completely taking over the game in game 2, and then game 3 was like another kind of rollover game where Dig just like didn't feel like they were putting up a big performance. Their bot lane was getting smashed all series long, basically. They just looked outclassed.
And why do we think that happened?
Because P1's a better team.
I mean, that's pretty straightforward, but do we have any other analysis we would add to that?
I mean, Dignitas is not good, I think, is a good way to
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the other side of that, right?
They don't.
I'm glad people are tuning into this. They have learn about all this.
No, they have a very one-dimensional playstyle, and I think people thought they kind of took off and got a lot better, but they just got better at executing, like, going top and kind of wandering around aimlessly.
I thought it was, like, to add to your point, I thought it was pretty telling that they were being run around the map by P1 despite being, like, well ahead in gold. And I think P1 only pulled ahead in gold, like, at the very end of that game, if I remember. But they had just way better map control and side lane pressure.
A lot of Dignitas' like comebacks in the second half of the season, not comebacks, but just like wins in the second half of the season, where due to Chaser having like really good early games where he would like snowball Keen or Someday, or just like counter gank the enemy jungler, stuff like that. And that didn't happen. P1 was using Inori this whole time, no Meteos. Sounds like they don't really plan on using Meteos too much more, and it's going to be Inori. But he looked fine, and he didn't get destroyed by Chaser. There was even a game where he was on Graves, and even though he had one of the ugliest Graves clips in human history, like on the level of Padronowski, the famous Graves play, he still like pathed well and kind of got the better of Chaser. So Chaser he had like maybe the first game that looked good, but then didn't look good the other 2 games, and he was kind of the big spark that they need in the early game. And then come mid-late game, like Arrow and Ryu are just 10 times better than Keen and Laud.
Yeah.
I mean, people say that Dignitas had a good early game because Chaser camps lane, but to me, that's not necessarily a good early game. A good early game is like understanding how to get yourself to a point where you can do well in the mid and late. And I just felt like it was just not, they don't really think to that part. They just kind of are like, we're going to camp a lane. And that's not even good jungling. So that's why I have a lot of issues with Dignitas in general. So.
Yeah.
But, like, my one hesitation on this series and not predicting a 3-0 initially was just because P1 didn't look that great in the last weeks. So I think that was more the question mark than whether or not Dignitas would be, like, even with P1 on form.
That was a weird one for me, just because it was hard to tell how much P1 like even cared about that week, because against C9, they clearly cared, and their supports just got murdered in lane. But then against TSM, they were using Shady and Inori the whole time, and you weren't really sure what they were thinking with that. And it just kind of felt like they knew they were third place. They didn't want to beat TSM because then TSM gets second, and then if they win, they play TSM probably. And I would say most teams would prefer to play C9 over TSM. So it was kind of like, how much did they really even want to win some of the series that weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing for me in watching P1 this weekend was that Inori was a little bit more, so like even where he had these kind of visible mistakes that everyone on Reddit is going to point out and kind of be like, oh my gosh, can you believe he messed this up? But I think his restraint, I guess, was something I hadn't seen from him in the season. Previously, when he would play, he would always kind of try these really aggressive plays, sometimes without proper vision or support from his laners. And he would either get punished for it or look really, really good. And if he got punished for it, he would kind of keep pressing the issue where he really shouldn't, because it will just kind of snowball that deficit. And I thought he was pretty even-keeled in these games. So I thought that bodes well for Phoenix One moving forward up against C9.
Yeah. By the way, we are in Twitch chat right now, and I'm able to read any of the stuff off.
So please harass Travis.
If you guys say anything or you make an interesting point, there's a chance maybe we'll reference it on the broadcast. I'll throw it back.
Twitch chat's going to say something interesting worth talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, good joke.
I mean, there's no kappas or anything right now, so I think maybe
that's what you would talk about?
Yeah. No, I'm saying because there's no kappas, I have more faith in this, you know. All right, so let's talk about the Sunday match. I think, Mark, you introduced it, right? So, Emily?
Okay. So Sunday started off really well for CLG. They ended up 2 games, and then going into the third game, it looked like it was going to be CLG at 3-0, and it was not. I think a few things to look at as points of contention in this match. Rengar priority was absolutely massive in these games. Xmithie never really looked as good on the Graves going up against Rengar, and obviously they had Rengar for the first 2 games. So I think that was really important. I think there are a lot of visible things that people will point to CLG and be like, you made this very obvious mistake here. The number one thing being Darshan kind of going over into the above the Baron pit as Camille onto Karma, and everyone was there, and that's kind of the play in game 5 that everyone's, I think, going to point to and say, like, what's going on with this team? What happened? What do you guys think happened?
I would say it's probably like a little bit of nerves, because even like after that play, they weren't in the worst position. It was like a 3v5 where they had to hold versus Baron, and like they played it reasonably well. They got like a bunch of the members low, even though they didn't get any kills. And then like they had Kalista and Nami up with Sums and Alt, and instead of being like, okay, I think we got them off Baron, Stixxay flashes in for a reset kill on Kalista, and it's like, you need to understand the situation. You should not be going for that. You should be looking to just stop the Baron, stop the bleeding, and then like reset the situation. And then once Kalista flashes in and dies, then despite how low they are, there's literally no one up but Anami, and they're basically able to take the Baron, and from there FlyQuest got like a really big lead. So it did kind of feel like game 5, they just like, because they were winning that game and they were moving around the map well, and it looked like they kind of even like assumed that they were going to win. It kind of like had that feel where it's like, we're doing it, guys, we're going to clutch this out, and then they just dropped the ball hard.
I still feel like that game, there were just a lot of fragmentation in general. And I do think in part, like, obviously it wasn't this game because this game wasn't the Rengar game. But in the Rengar games, there was just a poor understanding of where the vision line should be against Rengar. And you would just push up to the tower and the Rengar would just be super easy to get to you. Like, there was little effort made the entire series by either team playing against the Rengar to like track the Rengar well. So I thought that was a really big problem. But in the 5th game, it felt like that kind of principle was still applied, and it was just they got continuously lazy with vision and how far up they could be pushed. And it was like CLG had almost gotten desperate, because even at the very start, you know, when you have like the echo push up and everything else, it just felt really like they were already going to lose that game, even though they were ahead.
Yeah, games 3 and 4, like there's the level 1 game 3 that basically ruined their ability to have any mid control, because their jungler's dead against a Rengar level 1, so Rengar gets like super advantage when he already like skirmishes pretty well, and then your mid lane has no flash on Syndra, so she can't bully as hard as she wants to pre-6. And then game 4, they were trying to contest the vision, and then they got picked off that one time after they had gone for like blue buff vision, and then after that it was just like, after the Syndra's flashes down, Arrow comes up mid lane, snipes out he dies again, and then like once again your Syndra's getting kind of like rolled over, and it's just like hard to contest vision at that point, I think.
Mad2488 in chat says, as much as I like FlyQuest, CLG is the better team by far. They should have easily won. They played very well the first 2 games, very good at trading objectives. The last games they just threw way too hard. I agree, it was nerves.
Well, I didn't mean to say CLG deserved to win that series and their nerves like are the reason.
Mad248 agrees with you.
Yeah, that's
way better team. I
didn't say that. I just think like in terms of mid-series adaptations, like FlyQuest correctly identified like priority on Rengar. They because both teams were selecting blue side, and then after they won their 3rd game, they went back to blue side on game 4, and then that forced CLG onto blue side, and then they had to ban the Rengar in game 5, but at that point they kind of like figured out, okay, we take away the Ashe as well. And they were able to grab that on the first rotation red side in game 5. So it felt like they just kind of figured out what CLG wanted to do after CLG had the better drafts in game 1 and 2.
So CLG is not the better team by far.
No, I mean, I think it was a very close series. Even like game 5, like Kelsey was saying, like it was scrappy. Like people were not playing super well. Even though we're talking about that one at the red buff that threw the game, there's a one before that ended up in a 1-for-1 in mid where Darshan just jumped in on the Karma who flashed out and pulled him into his team, and he died.
Yeah. So setting aside the analysis for a second, because I'm about to speak and certainly I can't do any of that, but I do want to say, as much as I enjoy CLG as a team and certainly enjoyed their run last year, going through MSI and all that stuff, I'm actually kind of happy that FlyQuest won, because I think they are the much more interesting story for this split. Like, and I'm curious to see from you guys how you feel about this, but I feel as though CLG is just, they've been kind of like middle of the pack this split, didn't make a roster change, no interesting stories around any of their players. Like even Envy has like Lyra, who, I mean, we'll get to that in a little bit, but so many people think is amazing. And FlyQuest is just, I think it's cool to see all this old guard, and I don't think this is going to happen, but there's even a chance for a FlyQuest C9 matchup, right?
Yeah, man, I just love hearing about high shot calling. That's not an old storyline.
Okay, I know, but there's the rivalry. I'm
kidding. I'm kidding.
Like Moon is.
I think the story of Moon is really interesting.
Yes.
Because I do think he has improved immensely as a jungler, and in his own words, like multiple times, he's been really upfront about talking about how it was kind of his own mentality issues that he had to work through, and being on this specific team has helped him significantly with those. The thing about FlyQuest that I found the most interesting in the series actually is that for the most part, aside from like the Evelyn pick, they generally played it like pretty standard, and they attacked CLG pretty standard. And that's honestly, like, I was kind of half joking, but half not. Like, I expected them to pull out some really wacky cheese picks in an attempt to beat CLG, and that's actually not how they approached this game.
I think the most surprising thing to me is just how well I thought Lemon played relative to Aframu, because Aframu maybe hasn't had the best split, but it was still like, I felt like Aframu generally didn't even use his picks that well. He was super far back in lane on Nami and things like this, and then I thought that Lemon played it pretty well in terms of knowing when to lane, like setting up the karma cues and things like this. So I thought that was surprising to me.
Yeah, Lemon was always one of the OG karmas. Like, he was one of the first people playing it, so good to see he still has that one in his pocket. And I do like them playing more standard, because we saw in that first, like when they were super hyped up, C9 versus FlyQuest, when they were both like 6-1 or 7-1, whatever they were at.
Yep.
The game that they beat C9 was the one that they played standard, and I don't know what they were doing in the middle of the season in terms of practice, and like why they were starting to play Mordekaiser.
Running it down mid and picking weird stuff.
Yeah, I don't know what happened, but they clearly like can play standard relatively well, for North America. So I'm glad to see that they didn't go for some super cheese stuff.
Well, let's move on to our next topic, which I know, Kelsey, you were going to bring up, which is do players change their play styles? I think this was in reference mostly to some conversation around Reckless this weekend, right?
Yeah, so moving over to the European quarterfinals, Sunday there was a really exciting series between HGK and Fnatic, because it went 3-0 in the opposite way that I think a lot of people predicted it to go. And key to this was kind of how well the bottom lane played and how well they set up this bottom lane camp style. And in the past years, we've seen Reckless be this guy who's constantly criticized for his laning phase, not because his laning phase is super bad, because he just almost always seems to go defensively or try to go even in lane. And then this was like, okay, the team is playing around him, he's camping him. He's had a really good season in terms of that. And last year it was always this kind of thing where someone on this team needs to step up, because no one is pulling pressure in laning phase at all, and this team is constantly falling behind. We changed it so that there can be no more lane swaps, like what's going to happen. And he plays like Twitch, right? He plays Vayne, and I don't know, they just, with like the Camille support, and Camille leases a really, really strong combination in top lane, right? So it's going to be a really strong combination in bot lane as well, in terms of getting ahead. So I think like the question is, like, has Reckless's playstyle changed? Because to me, I think even going back to 2014, the way laning has changed, she's just like become so much more dominant in lane and as a carry and as a side laner. And people are asking, like, why are you playing this Kennen AD carry? It's because like the fundamental side lane ability of Kennen and the fact that Fnatic rely on their AD carry to side lane so much has kind of made this pick super popular. So I think that's a really good topic for me, because do players change their play styles? Do they transform?
And before we get into that, I will say, Twitch chat, I don't know why it's spelled Adapat on the lower third. Hopefully we get that resolved. We'll adapt to the correct spelling in just a moment. But back to Kelsey's point, either one of you guys want to take that on?
I mean, I'm not sure. I think the thing that was most interesting to me about what Reckless did in this series is that I didn't see it as a like complete like 180 of his playstyle, and I know that's not what you're trying to say, Kelsey, but the thing I like the most about it is that it was kind of
is, but go for it.
Okay. Well, I am going to say then I disagree with you. No, I think one thing that was really interesting is that I think it was an interesting natural evolution of what he's been doing on Fnatic. So we've seen them play a lot around this split pressure. I think the AD Kennen is a really good microcosm of how Fnatic does like to play to their side lanes, and that's why a lot of other teams who have picked that pick up in the bot lane have not succeeded with it because they haven't been able to either use it as more of like a side lane duelist or splitting pressure in both top and bot and setting up like a 1-3-1. So it's not always about like Kennen's engage, but just about the fact that he can very easily go off to a side lane and do his thing and push lanes almost like a top laner. But I think you saw Reckless playing that previously. And before.
That's not...
Oh, no. Okay. No, go for it.
It's not about the picks, right? It's about like how he plays the laning phase in the early game, which I think is really shocking and different. Okay. And also how he plays team fights. Because, Reckless is good at spacing in team fights, but he always plays like back. He always does like the almost kind of blue build Ezreal style where you're using the Iceborne Gauntlet to zone and things like this, and then he relies on his solo laners to do like the initial assassination and things like this. But like the way he was weaving in and out of team fights with Vayne, the way that he pulled people when he was side laning down and kind of just like outplayed them, it was really different from the Reckless we used to seeing. And a lot of people were comparing him to 2014 Reckless, but the secret of 2014 Reckless is he almost never outdamaged his mid laner, even in the context of a meta which was like really AD carry dependent. So I don't know. It was just, and he almost only ever had carry games on Lucian, and Lucian was like kind of busted in 2014. So to me, this is like a brand new kind of Reckless.
So Emily and I were talking a little bit before the show of examples that other people were changing their play styles, and most of the ones that we were coming up with were like supports and junglers, which that makes sense because they are so kind of meta dependent in terms of how you have to play the champions. So, like there's a huge difference between I'm playing Thresh and Alistar and Leona, and then like I'm playing Janna, Karma, Nami, and like even like to an extent Zyra. So we were talking about Adrian as someone who during his tip days was playing exclusively melee tanks and initiators, because like Rush played a lot of damage dealers, and they mostly had like this 2-tank thing going on with Shen as well for impact. But then he went to Immortals and he goes all mage type supports. Everyone jokes about how his champ pool is tiny because he just runs the same thing over and over. But that wasn't like a huge change in playstyle necessarily. That was just like what he thought the strongest thing in the meta was. You see that a lot with top sometimes too, where like, okay, now you need to play GP because it's just busted, and if you don't play GP, your team's worse. And that's a different style champion than tanks. But in terms of someone who just fundamentally starts asking for more resources from his team and carrying correctly, that is surprising, because like a lot of old guard players who had a unique playstyle, like Froggen or someone like that, is still playing mostly the same playstyle. Like he's picking Karthus again in 2017.
Piglet also picked Karthus, but
changing his playstyle.
Well, he kind of
he died a lot more. That's a playstyle change.
I think, to Kelsey's point, that makes Reckless's thing almost more impressive, because all the things I could come up with, again, were like supports or junglers, and those two roles specifically are the ones that kind of have to flex around the team a lot more. And that's actually why you see a lot of, especially with junglers, people being like, oh, this jungler sucks now, what happened? And it's usually because their role changes completely because of the way that meta and champion picks shift. Like either you can have like a farming DPS style where you have to kind of position more on the back line in team fights. You can have be more of like an initiator for team fights. You can be more of a disengaged person, etc. And so I couldn't, when we were thinking of this, I couldn't come up with anyone who wasn't a jungler or a support that didn't change their play style, I guess, but it was more of a natural meta shift where they kind of had to adapt to that new role.
The best, I mean, and it's like the really interesting thing, right, is that like Reckless was kind of developing this style in a utility carry meta, like starting earlier in the split, right? So that's even more interesting to me, is that like his team needed someone to pull lane pressure. They needed someone to be kind of like this sort of hard carry. Going back to last year before Cooney left and they didn't have anyone pulling pressure, it was so it's like interesting to me that it's not even a meta thing, right? So
yeah. Well, I think that wraps up that topic, but kind of similar to changing stuff up. Emily, you were going to talk about orgs sort of adapting for playoffs, and I think you were going to look at Africa as an example, right?
So I was having a conversation with someone even before the playoffs start, and we were talking about how like some organizations, for whatever reason, there's this weird, I don't even want to say stigma, but I guess like tradition or legacy that they have specifically that kind of carries on with their organization. And so the Africa Freaks have now gone to playoffs 3 times. They have yet to win a game. The first time they went was last year in spring, and it was actually a really like kind of shocking Cinderella story because they had this team that was kind of like ragtag band of streamers in the off season. They were like streaming just to get attention, to get a sponsor because they didn't have one. And Africa picked them up, and they were kind of bad at first. And they started improving, and they made it into the playoffs over Samsung, and they lost 2-0, and they were like, okay, the nerves got the best of us. Like, next time we're going to be fine. They went to playoffs in summer. They got 2-0'd again. This coming split, they change so everything. Like, the old Africa team leaves. It's a completely new team. It's a completely new coach. They got the StarCraft legend Isle of Uv to coach their team, and he has this very interesting coaching philosophy. There have been a couple of interviews with him that I recommend people read just if you're ever interested in that, because he's a very interesting guy, and he goes in depth into this coaching philosophy where he really wants to inspire this like passion and ambition where you just think of nothing but the game. And this team was very up and down throughout the season by his own admission in terms of him inspiring the players and trying to get them to have that hunger. So it's just completely different mentality. They go into the playoffs. They, by all accounts, look like the better team, even within the games, in my opinion. And they still lose to MVP O2. So I guess I wanted to know if anyone else has other examples of just an organization that cannot shake this kind of stigma or legacy. I'm not trying to talk about Team Liquid.
I wasn't going to mention.
Mark is giving me the stink eye.
No. I was looking at Travis.
Yeah, I was looking at Mark because I was like, this is going to be hard.
I wasn't going to say Team Liquid.
Okay.
Because they didn't make playoffs enough. When I was on Team Liquid, our thing was we didn't lose in the first round of playoffs. We always got past that. And then now they seem to be struggling a little bit more with that. But I was going to say Team Liquid. I mean, TSM. What am I saying? God damn it.
Yeah. You can't stop yourself.
Their stigma is that they make the finals every time. Yep. I don't think they want to shake that. But what's really crazy with them is that no matter what, when they look god-awful in spring 2016, you think that they like, oh my God, this team might get like even relegated despite this all-star talent that they have. Playoffs roll around. They get it back together. They make it to the finals, and then they lose a best of 5 versus CLG, where they almost could have won the whole thing. It was a 5-game series. So I think TSM in North America is kind of that example, but in the opposite way, where like when playoffs roll around, it's like, yeah, they're going to make the finals.
Yeah, that is really interesting. But the difference here, so you were saying that Africa, and I'm sorry, I'm ignorant on the subject, but they literally changed their lineup pretty much completely.
Yeah. It's just a completely different team. They went out and like basically bought like all new players. It's Marin, like the typical lineup you see is Marin, Spirit, Kuro, Kramer, and Tucson.
Right.
And the old team was basically they came up as Anarchy. It was Mickey's team.
But I mean, so the difference here, like TSM, I feel like it's kind of easy to say because you might say things like,
they've had Bjergsen and Parth has been around a while. But I was going to say, and I don't know how much this plays into how the Korean teams run in terms of infrastructure, but like Reggie comes in and out of that team a lot for TSM, and you can kind of see when Reggie suddenly gets involved in the team, there's this sudden uptick in performance. Right. And so even though there's a lot of variables, like there are still some set variables in terms of like Bjergsen and Parth have been around for probably the longest 2 standing members.
Right, but Andy maybe is the
right, and you can say even if we want to talk about Team Liquid, like Steve often gets involved for his team as well, and like the underlying kind of like mentality of the entire organization doesn't change just because the coach is suddenly, because he still has a boss he has to answer to, right? And there's like certain pressures that come with that.
Well, the thing with Afrika though, before we get into like things changing completely different, is this is literally the first playoffs where things have been completely different. So it's like once it could just be a complete coincidence, and before for them it was just the same lineup and all this other factors.
Do we know example, like ownership for the team? Like, is it the same owner who like gets involved with the team? Is there any kind of like background story like that?
No,
they had a new sponsor starting like last summer, right? So
last spring, yeah.
When you say sponsor, you mean
Afrika TV?
Okay,
became their sponsor.
Okay.
Because before they were just Anarchy, and then they were.
When you guys say sponsors, it always throws me out. Like I know that like Fighting Games does this too, but I always think like new org or new owner or something like that. It's weird. Like I think sponsor, and I think like HyperX.
Yeah, it's like different between like brand sponsorship and like title sponsorship.
Yeah, this is their title sponsorship. So Afrika TV.
So there's
Kelsey, you had another example.
Yeah, well, this example just died this week, which is the H2K example. Always semifinals. Like 2015, every semifinal. Like the only exception was 2015 Worlds, right? Because even 2016 Worlds, it was semifinals. But it was like you get to semifinals and suddenly they make the same draft mistake over and over and over again, and they don't adapt in the series, and they start to choke and everything. This time, they lost in quarters, but it was because the only players that remained the same between 2015 and 2016 were Odo and Ryu and the coach Prowley. So it was really interesting to watch them lose semifinals like every time. And now they lost quarters. So
if I can kind of broaden this conversation out, it's interesting because we're kind of talking about how like either consistency or inconsistency from orgs and how maybe this stuff is happening at somewhat of an org level. Obviously, I feel like there's a conversation to be had there across the board. Like why, not to bring up Team Liquid, but why do they always have struggles like this? Why? And I was interesting. I was talking to a coach recently who I will keep anonymous because I don't know.
But tell us later.
If he, off air, because I don't know if he wants me to say this, but he was talking a lot. It was a dude. That's the hint. That about how he feels as though orgs, it's almost like a company culture thing. Like
right, that's what I was kind of getting at.
Yeah, it's like there is something just sort of systemic to the way some of these orgs function, where it's like something about the culture really enables some team to have a great amount of consistency in some area or inconsistency or other, and it's just kind of interesting because I think we all spend so much time. Because esports, unlike traditional sports, is so much focused on like the players and the coaches and less on the franchise or brand. We spend a lot of time thinking about like what are the greatest coaches, what are the greatest players. We spend less time thinking about like what are the greatest orgs. And I think that there's something there. SK Telecom. Yeah, you whispered that so quietly that I don't think anybody heard you.
Yeah,
SK Telecom.
Even the coaches think people get that stuff wrong all the time.
Yeah.
Which I think we'll talk about a little later on in this show.
Yeah.
We will.
For sure.
Well, anyway, so I think we can wrap that topic up, and we are going to go to a break, so we will be right back after these messages.
That's it. I quit.
I'm so sorry.
There's no way you get that.
March 15th, 44 BC, Rome. The Emperor Yiliang Peng, known as Doublelift, rules over CLG with an iron fist through many years of war. Just as he is about to establish himself as a member of CLG for life, his best friend and teammate, Afromu, along with other members of the CLG Senate, make their move and stab him 35 times on Twitter, killing CLG Doublelift and giving rise to TSM Doublelift. This story has been confirmed true by a man outside named Mark. I'm Buddy Hutton, and this is True Esports History.
With these wonderful folks. Let's go ahead and talk about the next topic, which is a Kelsey topic, pointing out that, hey, if you don't have an import, you make it in to playoffs.
It's just a fact.
That's exactly what she's saying.
Yeah. No, go ahead, Kelsey.
The reason this topic is relevant is that we still have one more week of regular season in the LPL, but OMG just qualified this week by beating Royal Never Give Up, who is another all-Chinese team. So both of them are all-Chinese teams, and they're top two in Group A. They have the same group format as Europe, which is A and B group, and so they're technically at least a top 5 team of 12. So that's kind of a really interesting storyline, is just that OMG, Royal Never Give Up, FlyQuest in North America, Unicorns of Love, Fnatic, and Splice all made it to the playoffs in their respective regions. And these are the regions that have imported Korean players most heavily, right? So that's the really interesting thing to me, is that this is happening. After 2 years of just really heavy importing, we're finally getting domestic rosters that are outperforming and doing incredibly well.
So the question I have about this is those Chinese teams who are making it into playoffs with no imports, those are some of the biggest Chinese teams in the scene, right? In terms of popularity and resources?
Organization.
Yes.
Yes.
But OMG have had the same since they lost the big names. People think OMG, they think Going,
cool,
Loveling, cool. But since most of those guys retired at the end of 2015, and even in 2015, they were really, really bad. Since then, they have not made playoffs, really. So this is them finally coming together and going back up. And a lot of people are like, well, yeah, but the big name Koreans, they left. It's well, the teams that still have the big name Koreans are at the bottom. LGD just got thrown into relegation with Imp. Yuzihun and Bengi are not doing well in Vici Gaming, things like this. So it's it's not like they can't compete with the teams with the big Koreans. It's these orgs are finally being able to get it together and to get strategies. And then the thing is that both of these teams changed their coach also. OMG went back to the coach they had in 2014. Royal Never Give Up got Firefox, who's famous for being memed to death in 2015 with LGD Gaming. But he was on IME as the analyst for a while, which, by the way, IME are a bottom of the barrel team now. So, yeah, really interesting. Fun stuff.
Speaking of memes, there's an excellent meme that I've pulled up on the computer here. I'm sure we'll take a look at it in a second. Just about that. I think you retweeted this, Kelsey. I saw it over the weekend and decided to pull it up. But go ahead, Mark.
I was going to ask for my kind of final question on OMG. What was did they just keep the roster the entire same between splits and they just improved, or did they get more talent from China that they signed on and they got a new coach and they kind of retooled their roster?
They kept the same roster, actually, from last year.
Yeah.
Yeah, they kept pretty much the same roster. The only difference is that they got a new jungler, who was a jungler for Vici Gaming for a while when Dandy was playing top in 2015.
I think we're losing you, Kelsey, so we'll just have you call back.
Kelsey's coming out.
Yeah, it's okay. But I think I do have the meme up, so that'll be a nice distraction for us while we get her called back. But go ahead, Mark.
So the point that I was kind of working towards with those kind of questions I was asking was that at least in the North American scene, because technically TSM has no imports, because Bjergsen, sure, he's a Western player, he's from Europe, but he's grandfathered in as an NA player, and he's obviously speaks English, and that's the big point that people get at with the no import rosters is culturally not a big gap, communication-wise not a big gap, and that's the big driving force. But at least in North America, and it didn't really sound like this might be the case with the Chinese scene at least, but in North America, like the teams that do well with no roster imports, surprise, surprise, are the teams that are the biggest teams in the scene. And what they do is they gobble up all of the talent that they find domestically. Like Hanser made his way from a challenger team to Gravity to TSM once they identified him as a good pickup. And they do the same thing with everyone. Like, oh, they got Doublelift. They got Turtle now once Doublelift's gone. Probably one of the best native NAs you can get because you're not going to get Sneaky or Stixay, right? So it feels like it's a little disingenuous to attribute it just to like no imports. And I'm not saying that's what Kelsey's point was, but I want to like keep it in perspective here because for North America, you have that side of it. For the CLG thing, maybe you can make that point. And then FlyQuest has High, who has one of the best histories in the entire Western scene in terms of success. So it's not like, oh yeah, you know, FlyQuest is this up and coming org. It's like, no, they just grabbed 3/5 of one of the greatest North American teams of all time. And
but they could have pulled a Dignitas and supplemented those 3 players with like.
Yeah, and
Koreans,
I think if you want to make the point that FlyQuest wouldn't perform as well with an import jungler, I think that's a fine point to make. But if you look at what available talent remains left to be the team that's going to build the next non-import roster, like what are you building around? What players are you building around that aren't already like on those teams?
I mean, there are a few players in the challenger scene that I would look at, but I'm not sure if I'd build a team around them just because they don't have enough experience.
Like CLG sat on Stixay for a long time before they moved Doublelift for him because they were like, wait, we think this guy's actually a beast and he'll become a new carry threat. It wasn't just like, oh yeah, we grabbed this random AD carry and he turned out to be top 3 in the league. Like it didn't happen like that.
But I think an interesting point to piggyback off that is that a lot of times, and I'm not saying every team does this, and I'm not even pointing at any one team and saying they're doing this, but in terms of importing versus looking at domestic talent, I feel like for whatever reason, a lot of organizations don't bother to vet or scout their imports as much as they do their domestic players. So a lot of the time, if you have players coming from your own region, specifically in NA, just because I do see a lot of teams looking at the challenger scene being like picking and choosing who they do want to bring up like into those larger organizations. But you will see a lot of other teams not really scout out who they want. They'll just try to grab whatever like import they think will do well because they did well in Korea, because they did well in Europe. And I think that is my main thing with why some of these all-native rosters might be having success. It's not only like no imports, but it's also just people need to start thinking more about how their imports play, how many resources they take, what kind of players they are, how are they going to fit into the team that you're trying to build. Whereas with domestic players, I do think organizations are more ready to just go like, oh, okay, we'll take a look at this player. What does he actually do? And before we bring him on.
Emily, it's interesting you listed off all that stuff. You didn't really mention like language issues in like the scouting process.
I feel like that's been covered or like not once they made it on the roster, but like a lot of people bring up language issues as like a very easy shortcut to say like, why isn't this hybrid roster working out? Well, communication issues.
But then the players themselves are saying communication issues, right? Like you can't, like that is one of the frustrating things for me is that
players have never said anything that they didn't think out completely.
Yeah,
okay.
But I mean, okay, go ahead, Kelsey.
Well, I mean, people have said the language issue a lot, but it's the thing, it's like eventually you can get to a point where the language issue is normalized, I guess. But at that point, you have the player playing NA solo queue, playing European solo queue.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that's actually...
playing Chinese solo queue, and then, well, I guess China's
for
a weird
certain
example
teams,
because they mostly play Korean solo queue. But the thing is that after that time, that player basically becomes an NA player. So, like, the super cool high skill cap player that they saw, like, who's, like, constantly driven has become, like, culturally NA. And by culturally NA, I mean, like... I don't know. We're, I guess, not going to win Worlds, so let's just hang out.
That's there's so many things there. I'm not even going to begin to get into them. But I do want to say, like, how long do you think that takes? Because, like, let's look at the very first import player ever, Seraph. Like, the entire time he was on CLG.
Well, hold on, he wasn't even good. Hold on. Like, he wasn't, like, tearing up the
Monte Cristo's pick?
Oh!
I mean, hey, like, everybody...
I mean, I kind of feel bad for Seraph in that way, though, because I do think he suffered a bit from that whole, like, assumption, right? Because here's a kid, obviously very talented, has been trying out for, I believe, Najin at the time, and he played, what, 1 game for them? And I think... It's like, they were like, okay, he's really good. They bring him over. He obviously struggles, not because he's bad necessarily, but because, like, it's a whole different world for him. He hadn't even played competitively in Korea, really.
Right. So
suddenly, like, he's getting shoved, and they're like, "Here's Seraph. Like, here's his stream. Here's his, you know." I remember people like stalking him. Like, they were like, "When is he coming?" So, like, stalking his stream, like doing all these crazy things to find out like what Seraph was up to. That's a lot of pressure.
Right. And so that's what I was going to get into a little bit. There was like, the whole due diligence that the scene does is bad in terms of in getting foreign talent, not just players, like coaching staff. Like, the Dignitas coaching staff was kind of a sham in a sense for what they thought they were getting. And I won't get too far into it, but I'll just say, like, there was...
you know some secret stuff?
I'm just going to say Spenu, 2015 OMG. There was a coach on the Dignitas roster that was on 2015 OMG, which was a terrible train wreck, and a lot of that was on the coaching staff. And there was a huge interview that came out later about how, like, the coach didn't understand the players, and the coach maybe didn't have that much game knowledge, and all, like, he was trying to enforce things that didn't work, that the players didn't understand. And then he was on Spenu the next year. Spenu Korea had, like, all these super hyped individual talented players, and then they came and they did not know how to play the game, and there was no organization on that team. There was nothing. And then he gets hired again.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is we're talking about an esports industry problem, not really a coaching problem.
Well, what I was going to get into with that was that, yes, there's a lack of due diligence in terms of what will make a successful import, and obviously with the Seraph example, like, that was just not a good move because there's the cultural problems in terms of how does this person actually, like, does he want to live in North America? Does he know what it's like? Is he going to get homesick? How much does he want to learn English? All these kind of questions pop up. And an example of a team using imports correctly is P1, where they get Ryu, who has been successful in Europe for a long time. I know there's always been a bit of debate of how good he actually is in Europe, but you can at least say that he's had success there. And you know he's a decent English speaker and has already been abroad for a while. And then Arrow, the other guy they get, is just like the most happy-go-lucky guy you could ever find. Like, this dude,
and he was super willing to learn English.
Right.
Like, his progression in terms of, like, learning English and, like, really wanting to talk to people. Like, even when he was in Korea, I would try to talk to him in English about sheet masks of all things, because he would post, like, sheet mask selfies. Anyway, he would always respond in English. Like, he was very eager to interact with his English-speaking fans. And so when he came here, I think he was very motivated to be able to communicate with his team as quickly as possible.
Mark, I don't want to go too far down a tangent here, but Piglet is an example of somebody who gets a lot of flame for not learning English. Do you have any thoughts on sort of that situation?
Yeah, I mean, that was a complicated situation because we did a lot to try and make him feel comfortable, but he didn't, like, want to talk that much to us about what he was uncomfortable about because it was just like a cultural divide and like all these problems that crop up on top of the fact that he didn't speak English well on his way here. It wasn't like I think a lot of the imports that some at least that you see now are much more fluent in English already.
Right.
So there are a whole lot of problems with Piglet on top of the fact that, you know, he was not the easiest guy to work with on a team in general, whereas, like, you hear from Arrow, it's all rainbows, lollipops, and flowers, whatever. And I think that's the big difference is, like, you have to not only look at the play style side, which, once again, I agree, I don't think people think properly about necessarily because, like, okay, Ryu, playmaker early game and, like, good carry late, Arrow, monster late game, Zig, stable, playmaking jungler and Nori. The team makes sense in that regard, whereas that's not always the case with other teams. And then there's the whole cultural side, attitude side. You have to, like, actually get to know this person, speak to his previous coaching staff, as opposed to just be like, hey, would you want to play on an NA team? And they're like, yeah, that's a lot of money. That's not quite the scouting that you should be doing.
Kelsey, I know you got disconnected, but I do want to wrap up the topic. Is there anything that you want to bring up or add to it that maybe you could?
Yeah, I think for me at bottom, the issue is that we do have a dearth of research in terms of like what we do and how we're bringing players into teams. And I disagree a bit with Emily and say that it's not just Korean players, right? Because people don't even watch their own region's solo queue when they're scouting players. Like, they don't even know how to scout good rookies domestically, and that's within a scene where they can contact the players, they can talk to them, their players are playing with these players, and they still don't even know how to scout players. So how are they expected to scout players who are overseas, right, who speak a different language, who they don't watch.
And you have to go through middlemen to get to it.
Yeah, and have you talked to some of these guys? They're like, yeah, you need a Korean brain on your team. Genetically, there's no reason Korean players should be better than North American players, European players, Chinese players. So, I mean, to me, it just makes it's really weird. And like a lot of these scouts are incentivized to just sell you a player because they get a cut from it, right? So there's no... Like, it's very weird.
Yeah, it is. I've always heard really weird stories about how the interactions between Western teams and the little middleman situation thing works. All right, Mark, LCS voting controversy. I'm very excited about this. Let's talk about it.
All right.
And maybe, again, explain for people who don't.
If anyone missed it, the all LCS teams came out, which is basically the first, second, and third best player at each position. You get them all compiled, and the way that they come out with these lists is that they send out ballots to media members, teams, coaches, Riot, like analysts and stuff like that. So they kind of poll the general esports community to give their opinions on.
And were you
yeah.
Polled? Okay,
yes.
yeah. And I should say I voted for Yahoo Esports, but it was like us talking to Taylor, Kelsey, and Emily. So
right, and
we were part of the vote.
Yeah, so if each player does not get a vote. They have a player rep for their team, and their team votes. So it's like, you know, there's a decent system to it. But what happens is every time these lists come out and the coach of the split comes out, because we haven't gotten there yet. There's still the MVP, rookie, and coach to be announced. But regardless, at some point, people go pull up the spreadsheet because all the voting's public, and they go and they kind of like read through the whole thing to find someone who trolled, and then they blast them on social media.
Yeah.
And they tear this dude apart, and it happens every split. This time around, it was Smoothie and Zig who caught the heat for their voting, and it's a little bit of a complicated situation for me because on the one hand,
Froggen declined to vote too.
Right.
I actually liked that because I think that so like. I'm not like even picking sides on here, but I do think it's really awkward at times to ask players and coaches, well, especially like some of whom are going on to playoffs, to vote on like members of other teams, because then sometimes you have to turn to the person next to you and be like, yo, dude, I don't think you're as good as so-and-so.
Well, so...
and I know they try to circumvent that by saying like you can't vote for your team, etc. But I can still see how it would get kind of awkward. So I think my thing is, if you feel like it's going to be awkward, if you feel like something's going to happen between you and your teammates, which I think is totally understandable, just decline to vote.
Okay, so Mark, sorry, you were wrapping your sort of explanation.
Yeah, so what I was going to say for this was, one, yes, people should not troll this, and it's kind of ridiculous that they do. But two, it's not that big of a deal. Like, it's not the end of the world. It's not like we ended up with things that it's like, oh my God, how'd this guy end up here? Generally.
Yeah, but I think that the esports community is very sensitive to any kind of like unfairness or any kind of like flaw in the system.
I think they get really butthurt over some of that stuff that I don't necessarily agree with. And I think like you just like that guy can't be a player rep again. This team loses its like voting for this season or like whatever it is. Like it's not.
Oh, so you think there should be a?
Yeah,
it's weird because you're saying there shouldn't, like, it's not that big of a deal, but then you're saying there's
no.
Like
I'm
a
not
recourse.
saying like you should. Did you see the fucking message that Zig got? Like
yeah,
I sent it.
I felt
It was
bad
like,
for him.
yeah, this.
No,
dude,
I
like,
didn't see that.
The
What
community's
happened?
like tearing this dude apart. Yeah, they're like, oh, you should feel awful for yourself.
Yeah.
You should get kicked out of league. You're gonna have a mediocre career. You mediocre player. Like,
yeah, but you can't. Okay, people get that stuff for all sorts of things, right?
Right, and what they don't understand is the actual reality of what happened with the ballot this time around, because you couldn't go back unless you directly contacted Riot.
Yeah, but they were very vocal. I mean,
Do you think?
In the letter that I got, it was very much like, you should contact us. You know. Like,
do you think the players read that? They don't even read patch notes for the game they're pros for, Travis. They're not going to read an email.
Okay, but I mean, certainly they're like. Do you think that Riot is talking to like Froggen or any of these players directly?
No, they send out a mass email with a warning at the top, and then what do the players do? They just click the link, and then they click their thing. They're like, "Hey, dude, look, I voted for all TL members. I'm Zig. I'm hilarious. Oh, I can't go back."
I think it is partly on the team or the org to like you have. You can't just excuse their behavior.
I'm not excusing it, but I'm saying don't lose context of what happened here.
Yeah.
Because for Smoothie, who also got blasted for the same reasons because he trolled, someone else on the team, from my understanding of what happened, opened up the email and troll voted, and that counts for the whole team's vote, and then Smoothie can't vote.
So here's the problem, though. Like, this has happened previously. Like, all these guys should be aware that this is how this
I know.
works.
This happens every split. Every split, someone gets blown up on social media for this.
And so like, at what point in time do they learn? Like, this is why I don't have very much pity. Like, certainly people shouldn't be getting messages.
The two examples
like
that got blown up this time around. Zig, let's assume, let's take his side for a moment here, and he just wrote this stuff in, probably trolling with like someone behind him, like, look how hilarious I'm being.
Yeah.
And then didn't realize he couldn't press back, and then was probably like, oh well, I'm not going to go contact Riot and get into a back and forth.
Well, read email.
That's fine, but like, this dude is like prepping for playoffs, and he sees this thing in his email, and it's like his manager's probably like, "Hey, answer that." And
So the emails are going to the players, because that's the weird thing to me. I would send the email to the manager.
So that's what I'm saying. Like, who knows?
Okay,
because maybe the manager's like, "Hey, click this and fill this out," and they didn't tell him that you can't go back.
Well, then it's on the manager or whatever.
And that's my point. You're blowing these dudes up on social media when you have no idea what the actual process was that led to them trolling.
But there is a level of the org needs to kind of protect the players from this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
I certainly think there's some fault to blame here. You know?
I think what you do is, as Riot, like, the way it should be is like the community should not take it upon themselves to go get a pitchfork mob going and attack these people. I think Riot should contact the manager / player that they sent this ballot to in the first place and be like, what the hell happened? Let's figure this out. And like, if I don't hear like a satisfactory answer, like, there's some kind of punishment that comes down. But I don't want to see it come to the community to like just decide like this guy's the devil. Yeah.
I do. I agree with that, but I also want to circle back and say that I do think these votes are important, because I think we don't necessarily have a mechanism for rewarding outstanding players that's really as at this level, right? Generally speaking. So I think it's like really cool to have recognition for individual players or individual teams that are performing exceptionally. So I take, like, when I vote for these, because I voted for the EU one and I contributed to the Yahoo one, I kind of take it seriously. So I do think it is important.
I was going to piggyback on that, because I know, like, you and I did Europe, and we had like an entire conversation where we just sat down and like hashed out everything. And then for NA, we each submitted like all of our criteria, and we went down and like, and I know like everyone's not going to be putting, I guess, that much thought into it. So for me, it also points out, I guess, the discrepancy between like who ends up taking it seriously and who doesn't. And I don't know if that is also a timing thing, because to my point, I can see how it would be really awkward for some of these coaches and players to be voting on it, especially if you still have more games to play.
When is the better time to vote for this stuff?
I mean, I think after playoffs.
So the only thing just to jump in there, the only thing I don't like about doing it after playoffs is like there's a lot of recency bias with how people think about things, and like 40% of your teams and players are no longer participating in playoffs, and so I do like it being more regular season centric.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I mean, Lyra got jungler, and he was in like promotion tournament, so it's just a different thing. I'm surprised you're not pitting it more of a fight, Emily, because I know you feel very strongly about this.
Well, it's going to go into our next topic, so I figured I'd address it.
My final thoughts I'd say for this are just, I agree that this is important because it's good to be able to reward members of the teams who do well. And what I'd say is when you have 2 people out of however many voted that trolled, and like, we don't need to get so up in arms about it as a community. And I would say that compared to how it used to be, where like everyone was trolling this stuff like a couple seasons ago, I agree that was really bad.
Yeah,
and when they didn't, I mean, then it kind of brings up the thing of like, why are they releasing the votes now? Well, it's because previously when they didn't release the votes, everyone looking at the outside, they'd be like, first of all, how did you even arrive at these conclusions? We have no idea like who voted or what's even going on. And then secondly, like, how do we know people aren't trolling because we have no idea?
Well, and sure, I bet you Riot's not happy. Like in the past, if people were trolling, Riot probably looks at these things and they're like, really? You know, like by making them public, it kind of puts a little bit more responsibility on these guys. And by the way, that is one reason why I have like, as you said, you know, it's way better than before, but it also makes it like the community used to put people on blast and it has improved. But I almost feel like it makes it more justified for people to be more on blast because it's like, you know, now what the expectations are, you know what the community wants to see.
And I agree.
Yeah.
And then I say that's where the context matters, because some of these people have, to me, very believable stories. Because like people in Riot who were voting were messing it up, and they had to talk to their stats guys to go back and let them re-vote. Like everyone was messing this process
I never
up.
messed it up, by the way.
That's great.
I did it perfect.
You're immaculate, Travis.
It's literally, it's just a checkbox system. Like,
yeah, but like
you voted on it. Like, I get every now and then you could make a mistake, but
I'm not saying
in bold text constantly.
I don't know how
like,
they do it either, Travis. Everyone in the world's an idiot.
Yeah.
But I'm saying a lot of people were messing this up, and I'm not surprised that like the players didn't feel motivated to go back and fix their things. And this happens all the time in traditional sports, like NBA. Every time they have this kind of thing around, someone doesn't vote for LeBron James, and everyone loses their mind.
Yeah, well, it's always going to mirror, I guess, that stuff. But as a connected topic, we're going to move into to Emily's conversation here, which is about MVPs in and out of season.
Yeah.
So go ahead and break it down.
Okay, so piggybacking on the all NA LCS teams, and then obviously we have coach of the split and rookie of the split coming up, and then like overall MVP. I guess I just wanted to gauge, and we kind of heard from Mark on this, but I wanted to gauge what people think of, like, what is their own inner criteria for a most valuable player award? Because this specific year, I think that Lyra was a very interesting example of a team or of a person who people were having these like really long arguments about, because he was very obviously and I guess in my opinion, a lot of people's opinion, he was very obviously one of the top, if not the best junglers, right, in North America. But then at the same time, would you vote someone like that MVP in League of Legends? And how possible is it to vote a person as an MVP who's on a bottom team? Like, is it possible? I would actually argue it's not.
I think once EU voted Fnatic's coach as MVP, everything was on the table. Anybody could be.
I try to forget that happened.
Yeah. No, I actually, so I think you can have an MVP. I don't, in traditional sports, correct me, again, I'm a fool when it comes to this stuff, but Mark, tell me, I feel like MVPs in traditional sports are almost always on like the winning team or like a finals team or something, right?
Yes.
And I don't like that because first off, I think it's kind of boring. And secondly, I don't think it's always indicative that like here's a great example, and everybody's going to laugh because I'm going to talk about Doublelift. But had he shown up, turned Team Liquid around, they had gone off and done crazy stuff, saved them from even making it to the promotion tournament or whatever, like you could make the argument he was the most valuable player in the LCS that split. He like carried this single-handedly, turned this team around. I didn't vote for Peter, just to be clear, but you could make the argument that of
check his ballot.
We stopped him from voting for.
I was not.
We're gonna check the ballot on this one, guys.
I was not going to vote for Peter. I did as a joke. I had said to my colleagues that that would be worth it.
He was going to get voted in every position.
Yeah, I mean, have you seen him play mid? It's pretty impressive. But I do think that, yes, I do think it's boring if it's always just going to be somebody who's like in the finals. And I do think that you can make arguments that somebody who might be just like carrying a bunch of schlubs, is actually the most valuable player if they're doing crazy stuff.
So one thing about League that I find interesting relative to traditional sports is I feel like it's a lot harder to determine individual success from the outside of a team environment, and like exactly how good they are. And in pro sports, it's generally easier, I'd say. Like maybe running backs in like football is the best example you can give, where like if you put a bad running back behind a great offensive line, they're probably a 1,000-yard rusher. And like that's kind of the thing you're doing with League at every position, where it's like, well, how good is Arrow and Lane? Well, Stunt died 7 times that game. Kind of hard to have a good performance then. Maybe he's not MVP anymore because he had a bad weekend. It's like you get these like really weird arguments in League that you don't see as much in traditional sports, where it's like LeBron James averages almost a triple-double. He's probably pretty good. Well, let's put him down for MVP. You can do that any season. It probably makes sense. So I think there's like things like that. Like maybe Bjergsen's the LeBron James, or pretty much any season you kind of just throw his name out there. But with that in mind, I do think it's very hard for someone on a losing team to ever get it. I would like consider voting Lyra if he saved that team from going into relegations. Like,
yeah,
that's the same thing I just said.
Yeah. I'm agreeing. I'm saying that like going into week 9, there was like a possibility for Envy to avoid relegation through some weird tiebreaker thing. And if he like hard carried that team week 9 through that and got them out of relegations, I would have been like, this guy's insane. I might put him for MVP. Maybe not number 1 because you have you put like 3 people down. But I would consider him because like he was clearly the best jungler for me over the course of the season. It wasn't close, really.
Let me ask you a question because it's kind of tied to this. You were mentioning that it's kind of hard to gauge like value of a player or whatever because there are so many other factors that can contribute to them like having a rough game. How do you guys determine player of the game on broadcast or player of the match? Because you're having a similar issue there, right?
Right, and I mean that's something that we talk about a lot actually because supports feel relatively underrepresented, and it's a bad meta to like stand out as a support. Like you press RE on Karma when you're turning off of a Baron for a pick. Like, was that hard to do? I don't know, but there's obviously a difference in the level of Karma play between support players. So how do you judge that, and more importantly, how do you give someone a player of the game? And it tends to come down to who was the largest impact for them winning that game, who had the best performance. And you try and take in various factors like, well, he got camped super hard so it's not surprising he did well. And you try and like balance out.
Do you guys always pick a player from the winning team?
Pretty much always. We've talked about the possibility of doing it from a losing team, but it opens up a whole can of worms. So I think they're like hesitant to do that.
Sure.
I think the other thing that you talk about in MVP is that a lot of people are always saying, well, he does it with like less attention from the jungler. It's like, but if the jungler is constantly by his lane, he's doing something with that, right? Like if he's doing something with that like, so it matters. Everyone is going to have different kinds of criteria. So like you can look at a player who's just like super consistent without jungle pressure, without anything like this, who's like constantly roaming for his team, maybe doesn't do a lot of damage, but like will have a huge map impact. So each individual person is also going to value different things. So it's a really interesting discussion in general, but I don't necessarily think it's that hard if you really pay close attention to the game to distinguish individual impact, even if his bot lane partner dies a lot or whatever. But I do think it's a bit difficult to find things that people consistently value from analyst to analyst, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I kind of like that it's so subjective, though, because as long as you're getting like a big enough pool of people, it is really cool to see. Like, I think most of the time, or I would bet that most of the time, there's a pretty clear winner in that MVP category.
Yeah, I think for the most part, you've seen relatively like favored people for the MVP. I think where you see it actually less than the MVP is definitely like the all team picks, whereas like the third jungle pick for everybody was like such a mess because jungler over the course of the season, like some people looked like gods in the first half of the split and then turned into garbage, and then like some people were not the high impact junglers, they were just like the steady forces, like the Svens and the contracts and stuff like that. So like how do you value each of those things? And that's where it comes down to like what individual analysts think for that kind of stuff, and it's usually around like the third pick for MVP that you start seeing a little bit more, because like there's usually a couple that everyone's going to throw on there, and it's after that.
Emily, you wanted to talk or rant more, I think, about voting.
Oh, I just wanted to talk about, like, so in and out of season, I understand your argument for not waiting until playoffs or for doing it more based on the regular season. One thing I always have an issue with, and I guess I wanted to hear your opinions on it, is choosing coach of the split. So I understand. So like initially when Travis gave me the ballot, I was like, so can I just rant about how coach of the split, I'm not going to vote for it because of blah, blah, blah. And he said I couldn't do that.
I mean, you literally couldn't do it. It's a checkbox system. You were proposing that I somehow like send a message back to
Rant. So Skara didn't actually put down a coach of the split. And I was like, I should have done that
too. Now I'm kind of wishing that I did too. Just not because I don't think they're like, it's not like all coaches are bad, or like I think there are some really good coaches. But in terms of every time I talk to coaches or like about the game, about stuff outside of game, about their team, etc., it's never things that I can either say publicly, or there's just so much going on a team that I find it really difficult to interpret what is going on like in a game and attribute that to a coach specifically. And then additionally, with the way playoffs are, I honestly, for that award, I would, if I have to vote on it, I would rather do it once playoffs are complete.
Yeah,
because,
I mean, that's the... Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go for it.
I was just going to say, because, like, for an EU example, Prawley is always a contender for coach of the split, right? Their HTK has really strong early macro play. Usually he has good drafts, but it's like you get to playoffs and this guy, like, draft chokes in semifinals. And this time he did it in quarters, kind of. And it's where he's, like, banning the same stuff over and over again, even though Fnatic adapted, and then also all this other stuff. It's like, okay, so exactly when he picking weaker lane matchups, and it just felt really strange. So, like, do you then give Prawley coach of the split as consistently if he does, like, this kind of weird draft choking thing in playoffs all the time?
Shadow Chess in the Twitch chat says, the problem is that we have no idea how coaches actually work.
Yeah.
Well, so that's what I was going to say, too, is the general tools that people use to evaluate coaches are just bad. Like, we talk about draft all the time for coaches. Oh, draft this, draft that. And honestly, like, draft is super collaborative, and it's very dependent on what your players tell you. It's super dependent on what your players tell you. And if your player's like, no, dude, I can't do that matchup. I can't do that matchup because he's freaking out in playoffs because pressure's getting to him. Like, you just put him in that matchup anyways because you know it's right, and, like, you throw the game because you're just, like, destroying your player's mental. Like, it's one of those things where I feel that, especially, like, I hear people, when I was talking to people, like, oh, who would you put your coaches? Every time they made an argument, like, I was like, that's not compelling. I couldn't find a compelling argument on anyone. I didn't have a compelling argument for who I was voting for because you could punch a hole in any of them. Like, oh, Reaper's so good. Well, why didn't C9 improve?
You get to the point where it's all speculation, and that's what I really don't like about it.
I mean, I don't mind doing coach of the split if you don't think of it as, like, coach of the split. If you think of it as this team did something really cool strategically, or this team did something, like, surprising. Like, for example, in the case of Roccat, right, where they had this, like, super turnaround and they almost made playoffs and they went from 0-7 to 6-0 in the second half. That's like, okay, that's really cool. I want to acknowledge that. And sure, you're putting Grabs' name on it, right? And you don't really necessarily know what Grabs' individual impact was, but it's like, okay, we're acknowledging this cool, like, strategic or team development thing that happened that you can't necessarily put under MVP or, you know, player, all this other stuff. So I think that that's fine if you think of it in that perspective, which is what this award has kind of become.
I wish more... I was going to say, I wish more people would look at it that way, because I feel like a lot of, like, and especially another thing that happens with Coach of the Split a lot of the times is that you have people just throwing down, like, oh, this team's number one, okay, like, their coach is first, number two, et cetera, et cetera. And then you get to playoffs, and, like, for example, I'm going to use 2016 spring as an example, like, Zix was not up there. As far as I know, Parth was not up there either, considering that TSM were like 6th, right? And
you put Reggie in?
Just right in Reggie. And Dylan was up there, and obviously, like, not to say, like, man, Dylan's so terrible, but, like, then his team ended up losing. And I'm not even saying that's a fair evaluation of these coaches, because I don't think it is. I don't think, like, the only thing we have to go on is results. And I don't necessarily like that at all. That's why I don't like this award.
And I just to talk about Kelsey's point a little bit, like, you know, you can try and attribute, like, a cool thing that you see or turn around the season to the coach, because, like, Dig would be an example of that. But I often feel like because you are putting that name on it and it goes down in the history books as coach caught for this split or whatever, or whoever it ends up being, like, no one remembers the context, really, unless, like, they go back and actually start debating it. And that's the problem with the award being like, well, we're just going to recognize something cool that happened. No one's going to remember what the cool thing was. So, like, you know, Dylan getting it was because, like, in that way, it was really cool to see Immortals having an undefeated regular season or whatever. You know, like, they were 17-1, whatever. You know, it's like, we're going to give them an award for that because they did something really cool. And then it turns into, like, Dylan Falco, coach of the split, Raffle. Like, it becomes a joke.
That's not fair to him either.
Go ahead, Kelsey.
Oh, I was just going to say, as in, like, an alternative to Coach of the Split, I'm doing I'm organizing awards with the LPL English broadcast team for the split, and instead of doing coach, we decided to do like best drafting team, you know, like team with the most versatility and stuff like this, and try to give awards like that. So I think there are alternatives to coach of the split that need to be explored as well.
I think that's a good one, or just broaden it to like organization, because a lot of the times it's like, okay, well, Coach Chris or whatever gets the award, and it's not Tony, but it was like Tony did a ton of stuff for that team, and you can say like when TSM had that really big turnaround, like it wasn't Parth or whatever, it wasn't Weldon because he wasn't there yet. I think he helped a little bit, and it wasn't whoever that guy was, Woodbuck, that they had. It was Reggie a little bit. So like you want to say, okay, well TSM turned it around, because this is if we're saying the awards at the end of the postseason. You'd probably give it to TSM for that crazy turnaround.
You missed it. There was a great dramatic zoom in on your face right whenever that happened.
Get some more of those.
Yeah, just. But let's see if we can get it right now. Ready? Here we go. Dramatic zoom in. Go.
Control room's not ready.
Control room's not ready. No, how does this work in traditional sports?
I mean,
there's a lot. So it depends on the sport. There's still a lot of disagreement. I think one thing that there is, and I'm not like calling Riot out on this. It's just a matter of like available people. In terms of third-party media, there's a lot more voting because of just there's more.
But does that that solve the problem?
Well,
it takes away. So I'm not arguing that like, whoa, because I'm third-party media, I'm better than everyone. Like,
but we are. That's true. You're right.
No, it takes away that kind of like internal thing where you are on a team, and so you're seeing like the ins and outs of one specific team, or maybe another team if you're like really close to them. And it also removes that thing where I was saying before, where you feel pressure because you either didn't vote for your own players, or you are not able to recognize your own players because you honestly think they're the best. It also varies wildly by sport. Like,
that's what I was about to say.
Like the baseball writers of America are like their own separate thing way out there. And basketball is like insane.
It is awful. Because like it's such a player-driven league. I actually think it depends on, like she said, the sport you're playing. Whereas like league is actually, I'd say, a relatively player-driven league in terms of how the games are played. It's a lot of execution heavy. Like you can have a great strategy, you fall behind early game, you fall apart. Your team, like it's very execution heavy. Can your player play this matchup correctly? Stuff like that. Where like as a coach, I'm like, okay, well, Ori beats Casio, but my player sucks and he's down 10 CS in this matchup. It doesn't matter if you're a coach, your player can't play the matchup. So like in that regard, it's kind of like basketball where it's like, well, I can't guard LeBron James. Yeah. So like, LeBron James is coach of the split. I think football is one of the only ones where like coach of the split feels right to me.
Yeah.
All right, we'll wrap up the topic by me asking you, what was it like, and you can decline to comment, whenever Peter got coach of the split?
I didn't care. Okay. Like I think a lot of
people, afterwards, a lot of people, like I feel like even more than like the Dylan meme, like he got kind of blasted for that.
Yeah, I just kind of took it as like, okay, it was kind of to Kelsey's point about it was more of like a storyline thing where it's like we took this roster that was a mess in spring and we made it good by end of summer, where we finished #1 in the regular season. And I took it more that way. I understand like from the outside looking in, it's Peter Raffle Lowell, and that's why I think it's kind of sad, and that's why I don't think the award works that way, because for me, my name's not on there. I take a little bit of credit for it, but I also take a little bit of credit for the collapse that happened, and like all that context goes out the window, and it's just Peter sucks.
In my mind, you should take all the credit for the collapse that happened.
Yeah, sure.
It was all your fault, Mark.
Yeah, that's why do you think I'm out over? Why do you think I'm on a Yahoo talk show right now?
If this show collapses, it will be because of you. All right. Speaking of collapsing, we're going to collapse into a break. We'll be right back.
That's it, I quit.
I'm so sorry.
There's no way you get that.
year's 1920. The place, Detroit, Brazil. The great prohibition on gaming has begun. An establishment known as WISA starts. Their credo, we will limit the power of these esports players and stop them from bringing evil to Twitch TV. After the establishment of WISA, esports players are forced to go into hiding and play in game easies if they want to get any competition. A hero of the people known as Dyrus, along with his friend John Dillinger and Dyrus' faithful companion Mr. Pillow, decide to take on WISA. After the battle, known as World Season 5, John Dillinger was dead, Mr. Pillow was leaking feathers, and Dyrus decided to retire. The people were so distraught with his leaving that WISA was forced out of existence. This has been a true esports story. I'm Buddy Hutton.
Well, we are back now for the tail end of the show. And I'm hopeful everybody enjoyed that break. Somebody actually said in Twitch chat during the break that they should add in our little sizzle reel Mark Z singing the Silver Scrape song.
I don't think you guys have rights to that.
I don't think. Well, we do have. Hilariously, we can actually play Silver Scrapes because we use the same music library,
can you
right?
grab it from the LCS stream because you need my voice? I'm not singing.
I mean, we
again.
grab other stuff from the LCS stream.
No.
Yeah,
that was a one-time
Can
appearance.
you close us out with that show or that song. All right, Kelsey, talk to me about bot lane snowballing. This is one of your topics for this week.
Yeah, so I had a discussion this weekend with someone who will remain nameless because I haven't asked if I could mention
Who was
by
it?
name.
Can you give a hint? Was it Emily?
No, it wasn't.
Sometimes
Emily.
it is me though.
Okay.
But in this case, I'm not a man.
Where
Just this case.
Yeah.
the question was
Okay, sorry, Kelsey,
whether
go for
or
it.
not the question was whether or not the Blade of the Ranking changes made it, and the fact that 80 carries are doing more damage now and stuff made it more important to have like bot lane snowballing, because I think throughout the course of the split we've already seen, and then since standard lanes were enforced, we've already seen this idea where you kind of get mid ahead and you have mid push out and then you roam with mid jungle and you snowball bot because there are more players there's dragons there, it's stuff like this, and like getting bot lane ahead is really useful. But then now we have like 80 carries that actually do damage and are more effective with their leads. Since the Blade of the Ranking changes, we're seeing more stuff. So the question is that does this like make early game more important? Does this make bot lane more important? I mean, obviously you are also seeing top laners that play Blade of the Ranking too, right? Like Fizz and Kennen, things like this. So the question is, and then Rumble is still really good. So the question is like, is early game, the importance of early game increased? Is the importance of bot lane increased? These kinds of topics.
It's a definitely a complicated one because I think obviously the answer is like to a degree, yes. If you can actually snowball a bot laner who can take over the game the way like, you know, a Lucian can, or a Kalista, if you're seeing that, or Twitch can take over the game. I don't think you saw that before with Ashe, or Varus gets annoying. Jhin gets more annoying, but it's not like, oh god, this thing's just like hopped on me because I was slightly out of position. Like you could get setups and like get picks with them, but it was really not. This champion's out of control now, so I would agree that the importance of snowballing bot lane has gone up, but it depends a little bit on the rest of the meta as well, because if you're still seeing a lot of 1-3-1s, which we are, and 80 carries are mostly relegated to playing around the mid lane, they have a little less individual playmaking than you do when you have your in the side lane, like we were seeing with like the Kennen pick, for example. So I think it does depend on how it actually ends up shaking out a little bit more than just like 80 carries individually snowball a little harder.
Whoever's thinking, really quickly, Kelsey, hold that thought. It's Varus. You say Varus all the time on the LCS broadcast, and I'm just sitting there triggered all the time.
It's
Varus. It is Varus.
Varus.
Shaco!
I think that, I mean, you mentioned mid 80 carries not necessarily having that much playmaking. I kind of disagree with that, because I do think there are a lot of collapses that happen on mid lane and things like this. And so you also see, like, one of my most annoying things is that you have like 80 carries pushing out mid lane on their own and getting caught and things like this. So I think that there are still a lot of opportunities. And then like if you time the mid lane roam with the way that the wave is pushing, like how much pressure do you have in the sidelines? How much agency does the 80 carry have to have? So I do think that there are still like a lot of important opportunities, especially since I think a lot of teams are seeing more mid. Maybe I watched too much LPL and too much Unicorns of Love games, where they're just like a lot of these mid lane group fights and zero side lane control. But yeah, so
yeah,
and a lot of NALCS too.
Yeah, I mean, I've been watching mostly NALCS, so I'm watching like the Aries, the LeBlancs, like that kind of stuff get out of control. And to a degree, I mean, like obviously plays happen around the mid lane a lot for a big reason, but in terms of individual agency of the AD carry in those situations, it doesn't feel super high, quite like it does when you see an AD carry split pushing in a side lane, where like you didn't check this brush because there's less vision control in the side lane, and I pop out of the brush and I want 100 to 0 you with Ezreal because I'm at my 2-item power spike, or Lucian or Kennen and those kinds of things, and it doesn't quite happen that way around mid lane as much, and that's more what I was going for. Not that like an AD carry around mid lane doesn't make plays, but like you can't set up vision around the side lane and let your AD carry split push mid, and then they're just going to be on an island, and if you can't deal with it, it's a problem. That part doesn't happen quite as much around mid lane.
But we are also seeing a lot more sidelining AD carry picks as well.
Right, so that's what I was saying. It feels like it's trending that way, because before it was just like, send your AD carry mid, hang on for 15 more minutes or something, like try and make plays around that.
They're going to be Varus or Caitlyn.
And for more context to why I'm bringing up this topic, so I feel like it's definitely an EU topic, because we had Reckless going off in that game on Sunday, and then on Saturday we had the big meme where everyone was playing Kennen and they didn't know how to, and then you had Misfits had the turnaround, which was sparked by the fact that they drafted Thresh Kalista, right? And then that duo lane has a ridiculous amount of agency, and Misfits very famously play mostly with their support as their agent. So like the fact that they were able to do super well with botlane snowball was like, that became a much stronger strategy for them, whereas I feel like Splice had a lot more of a top snowball focus, and they couldn't make it as effective after Misfits changed up what they were drafting in the bottom lane. So I think that that's kind of what sparked the topic, and I'm wondering if it's like, because I still felt like getting bot lane snowball was important, but I'm just wondering, and a very common strategy, but is it more important? Because I'm not sure I 100% agree it is, but we'll see.
I don't know if it is, but I do think that another really good example of that would be P1 Dignitas, where, as we already mentioned, Dignitas's main strategy is going to be more around top lane snowball than anything else. And Arrow and Stunt were just like, but I know like we've kind of pointed out some of it might have been a mentality thing, but like by game 3, they were just like massacring and steamrolling that lane, and that is where they got a lot of their advantages. Like I talked to Nori after the game, and for an interview that's going to come out like later this week, but he basically was like, yeah, like honestly by game 3 I felt like I played well, but I didn't have to do as much because my bot lane was already so far ahead that like I didn't even, you know, like I didn't have to worry about it at all. And that's kind of where they ended up garnering most of their advantages early, if they did. Obviously, game 1 is an exception, but
I mean, mostly for the series that I felt like it didn't happen, because even in Africa MVP, there's a little bit of bot lane interaction. But I think the series where it didn't really happen as much was CLG Fly for the most part.
Which is surprising, given the fact that I think a lot of us heading into that series were going to be like, wow, you know, CLG's bot lane should smash them. And then it happened a little bit in games 1 and 2 where they were getting the better of them, but because like Smithy went down there and like, or it was Huhi,
yeah, with the Aurelion Soul.
But that was like, yeah, that's the Aurelion Soul game, not really like a bot lane smashing game. So yeah, I think I still think it's like super important. It's always been super important to crush bot lane, even the utility AD carry meta. You have so much setup down there. The globals go down there. It's just like the destroy bot lane meta that it's always been. Every time it's standard lanes, it's like who can get the 5-man playoff first to take the game over. But is it that much more important now just because Blade of the Ruined King's in the meta? I'm not 100% convinced.
Does that wrap that topic? Anyone else want to add anything else? No? Okay. Mark, there's no new promotion teams or no new teams entered NALCS through the promotion tournament.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a factual statement, Travis.
Yeah. And that's what you listed in the show notes as your topic, so that's why I'm saying it.
I know, I'm messing with you. So this is obviously going to be a scene-dependent kind of discussion. I don't expect it to be like, nope, NA didn't have any relegation, so it's time to get rid of them. But I do think it's the kind of thing where, at least in terms of the level of skill in the promotion tournament, was super, super high, where like Envy as the worst team in the LCS game record wise had a much better game record than most of the 10th place teams or the 8th place teams when it was an 8-team league would have. So it seems like the orgs are getting more competitive. There's being more parity in the LCS. You've heard that buzzword thrown around a lot. And it makes me wonder with like franchising eventually coming in, like, are people getting to be more okay with it? I know there's still a lot of people who want new teams in the league for new storylines and all that, but the player turnover is still relatively high between, you know, summer and spring from last year. And I assume it's going to be pretty high again this time around. I doubt everyone just goes in with the exact same roster. So to me, it's kind of getting to the point where, like, I'm fine if, like, relegations phases out in at least the coming year, because I don't really love seeing new orgs come in and just, like, have to retool entirely, because, like, even FlyQuest, for example, there's an article that came out that's like, FlyQuest is the only team that doesn't have any managers or analysts or anything. They're the best. And I'm like, that sounds awful.
Yeah.
Like,
so
also, that's probably not true. Like, is High sitting there writing the checks himself? There's no manager.
No, they have a manager.
I know they have a manager. So I know that article's wrong. They have a coach. They have a manager.
Red Bull has an interview with them. Jeff. His name is Jeff.
Yeah, I know Jeff. I'm his friend.
I interviewed him one time. Yeah. He wore an Ezreal cosplay. It was fantastic.
Yeah. Anyways, my point was, like, I would rather see, like, orgs leveling up over time consistently than just, like, getting replaced. Like, is GCU's infrastructure significantly better than Envy's? I
agree with you, and that I do not like this time around. I was hoping that neither of the teams would get relegated, because I don't know. But the counter argument is, if you get rid of relegations, are these teams going to be as good?
So this is one that I'd never agree with the community on at all, where they're like, if you get rid of relegations, everyone's just going to bottom feed in the LCS. And it's like, dude, they don't make any money. Like, people are still losing money.
Well, but in a world where we go to, they're calling them permanent partnerships, not franchising.
Right.
There's like a rev share situation. So this is what happens in traditional sports.
Right. So, but there's a difference between when you get rid of franchising and when you add rev sharing. From what they talked about, those two don't necessarily.
Yeah, they're not mutually exclusive.
You don't need to kick them in at the same time. So you
you can certainly get rid of relegation.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying, like, you know, 100% rev sharing is going to be like this amazing boon. Like, maybe you do have to start worrying about those questions, but, like, currently no one makes money by just sitting at the bottom of the LCS, and you're still going to see turnover in terms of team ownership, because they're going to sell their spots if, like, they feel like their investment's no longer paying off. I think that's how I would see it happening.
I want to know is actually, Kelsey can probably take this, because I was about to talk about LPL.
Yeah, Kelsey, go ahead.
I mean, in NA, maybe. So yeah, we are saying this is like a region dependent, but I still think in other regions like EU and LPL, there are teams that, there are orgs that aren't as maybe strong as some of the orgs that could be getting in.
You're saying they don't deserve to be in.
I'm not saying they don't. I'm not making a broad judgment.
You're sounding
like
very
Get Origin out of here!
Yeah.
PSG!
There are other orgs that might be slightly better in certain areas strategically.
Schalke already out too.
Yeah. Well, I meant they're out. Like, get them in.
Yeah. That's the thing. It's like, and then I'm also not like 100% up on the sports orgs themselves too, because I feel like a lot of times the sports orgs don't always know completely what they're doing, and they're trying to
look at Team Liquid. They're a sports org
mentality.
Now. They did not know what they were doing.
Super hard. And it's just like kind of weird. Whereas in China there are a lot of orgs that have a ton of money, right? And a ton of like people that just like bloated infrastructure that does nothing, and they have no idea what they're doing. So having infrastructure in and of itself isn't necessarily like mean that you're a good team or a good org. So like I think, and we've had in EU and China, like almost consistently every year that there's a new team, they do really well. They perform top half. Like right now we have QG, they got back in. And by back in, I mean it's still it's like kind of a new org. Their situation's complicated. I'm not going to get into it. But there's QG. We've had EDG in 2014. We've had wow, my brain. Snake. We've had all sorts of teams that have just like consistently had stuff. Like in EU, we've had Splice. We've had Misfits this year. We've had a lot of teams that are entering the LCS and doing really, really well. So, like, I think, again, I'm really hesitant to get rid of relegation in general, just because I feel like if we do it in one region, Riot have this weird tendency to want to apply everything globally, even when it doesn't make any sense. So that's like my one hesitation.
The thing about China too, as well, is the fact that isn't the challenger scene there like relatively self-sufficient in its own regard compared to other regions where it's like the challenger scene is just like basically non-existent except until it reaches the promotion tournament relegation stage, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and they have, it's like all the teams have their own gaming houses, and they're like actually Tencent provides gaming houses for a lot of the teams if they don't have them. And you have, like, I'm also really kind of sad about it because they're shrinking the LSPL slowly. Like, they're phasing it out every split. They're getting rid of 2 teams. So it went from 16 teams to next split it's going to have 10. And I feel like China's trying to get to the place where they're going to franchise, and it's too early. And so I don't,
And you think it's too early just because you think there are teams that are underperforming or the orgs are not supporting them the way they should?
I mean, yeah, but to see that, you don't necessarily have to, like, know the orgs intimately. Just if you see consistently new teams outperforming older teams, right? And it's happening every split, that indicates to me in and of itself that you're not at a place where you're ready to franchise.
So your argument is we shouldn't get rid of relegation until we don't think teams are going to get relegated.
Kind of, yeah.
I mean, I think it depends on the region. And I also think it depends on, like, what you're using. So I guess this is kind of tangentially related, but, like, a lot of people I talk to in North America, including, like, within Riot itself, it's really split on what people want the challenger scene to be. So are you actually trying to get a team into the NA LCS, or are you just trying to develop talent? Because the two things, like, again, they're not mutually exclusive, but in terms of farming talent from the challenger scene in North America, I do think that happens. So if that's, like, it's been getting better. I think that is a good goal. Like, you want to be able to have a way for your domestic regional players to be able to promote themselves up, right? I think with North America as well, it's also a region that's very used to franchising because most of the organizations that, I mean, like, the thinly disguised, like, we want long-term partners is, like, we want large organizations, preferably from traditional sports, who can kind of come in and support that kind of infrastructure. Like, challenger scene has always been this weird, in North America specifically, not in Europe and not in China. I don't think this applies, but, like, in North America, it's always been this weird, like, do we want this to be a legitimate league? Do we want this to just be able to place for people to farm players? Can organizations actually actively promote from challenger? Because, like, just recently is when we haven't had organizations in LCS owning challenger teams, and previously those were typically the organizations that did very well in terms of promoting their teams up into the LCS, and you know, often with LCS players just to, you know, get the spot.
I think the point about just how it should be scene dependent, I think, is the biggest thing. I think when you look at NA, you're saying, okay, these teams didn't get relegated. They looked pretty good. I haven't heard any, like, abuse stories where it's like, oh my God, these guys aren't getting, like, paid and they're getting murdered in their house the way that, like, you've heard.
Yeah, the murdering in their house was a pretty dramatic time.
Yeah, that was the dark days.
Yeah.
But I do think that, like, decoupling the LCS and the Challenger Series would be good, assuming that the way that you want to push it is developing individual, you know,
you just force all the LCS teams to have a challenger team.
Well, so you can do it a lot of ways, but I think even this part,
but my way is the best.
Okay, that's the greatest idea ever.
Thank you.
I'm glad you shared it. No one's ever said that before. But the big thing is the Challenger Series doesn't need to exist for each region the same way, just the same way you don't necessarily need relegations everywhere. If NA, and it's true, is struggling a little bit as a player base and like with the amount of people playing ranked, and the LCS is seen as this ridiculous hard thing to get into because there's a million imports coming in and basically 40% of the players in your league are not native to your scene, maybe the Challenger scene is better used there instead of promoting teams into the LCS and being this basically like booster system that it has become into being a development league for the collegiate players and the actual challenger players who want to eventually get into the scene, but no team's going to take a gamble on them until they've proven themselves in the challenger scene first. And they can kind of do that, but they're even getting crowded out there. Like, where are the NA mids? Where? I need an NA mid.
They all vanish.
Yeah, they're all like, legitimately, they're all swapping out of mid because it's such an important import position that they're all going to support. All the NA mids who are high rated are becoming support players if they're trying to go pro. Shady used to be a mid player.
Is
that a problem? Does anyone think this is a problem? I think it's a problem.
I mean, I think it's a huge problem, but I don't think like it's anything that we can. Like it's a huge.
Next week's
issue.
topic.
It's going back to the like import issue.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that you bring up directly because I have something that's from Riot specifically because I did a piece on this earlier where I talked to Riot and I talked to Misfits and I talked to Fnatic that you can find on Yahoo Esports. Okay. Where Europe has decided to diverge away from how the NA is using the challenger scene, where they're saying challenger scene is specifically for promotion purposes. This is where we farm new teams that are trying to enter the LCS. So we're not going to allow orgs to own a CS team, like, period, right? Next, like, going forward. After, like, obviously Misfits Academy and Fnatic Academy right now are in the final, so one of those teams are going to make LCS for sure. But they're now saying, okay, we're going to try to build up the national league scene in Europe, which is, like, China kind of has something like this with provincial leagues, where they have local teams that kind of build these things. Right now, I don't think it's ready for the responsibility of
developing
talent.
You're saying like a French team or a Spanish team or whatever.
Yeah. There's like a Spanish league and a French league and all this other stuff. So I think that right now, those particular leagues aren't ready and there are a lot of problems. Like a lot of them have like the import restriction only with like you have to have 3 Spanish players, right? And like so there are a few issues with that, but they're trying to, like Riot's saying in Europe right now, is that they want that to be where teams go to develop their subs and their secondary rung of talent, as opposed to Challenger, which has to be for promotion purposes only.
To your where's the NA mids question, by the way, Deuce 229 or 2229 says #GoldenGlue. So he's in Korea. That's where the NA mids are.
Oh yeah, the NA mids left North America because there's no competition. So
because they got
they went to
for their teams being bad.
Yeah. All right, Emily.
Oh no, I was just gonna say like that makes what Europe is doing. It makes a lot of sense for how, I guess, if you do want to. I don't think there's a one-to-one from esports to traditional sports. I guess I should frame this now because I feel like a lot of people are like esports should be like this, and I think a lot of times esports should just be esports. But in terms of what people are used to culturally in traditional sports in Europe, that system makes a lot of sense. Whereas in
much like
North
ties.
America,
ties also make a lot of sense.
I wasn't actually going for the ties meme,
but it is a meme, but it is also somewhat relevant that like.
Did you know that I actually prefer best of twos? Anyway,
I did
I prefer best of ones.
Oh God! All right.
Then you are lost.
It's more exciting. No. Okay. So my point is, I guess my huge issue with this is that I don't feel like, similarly to how sometimes traditional sports can be traditional sports and esports can be esports, I don't think everything has to be uniform across leagues. Like, if it makes more sense because traditional sports organizations are entering esports and they want that comfort of franchising because they're not used to sinking money into something that will be gone next split, right? And so you want to retool the challenger scene so you basically have basically a minor league where you develop your players and then they can advance to the professional team, if that's how you want to restructure it, just because that's kind of what happens here already, either through NCAA or through like the MLB, like minor league, I think that would make sense for North America, but I definitely don't think that should automatically mean it makes sense for everyone else. And I think if there's one thing that's kind of a failing across the board, it's failing to recognize different like cultural norms, I guess, when it comes to traditional sports.
Yeah, I think it's just a bit of a problem assessment task where it's like, okay, NA, you seem to have good orgs right now and you're mostly getting investors. So what's the next biggest problem? Oh, your native talent is not developing that much, really. And I mean, we're still seeing new people come in like, yeah, Moon and Acadian had great splits and contracts looks good, but like, I don't know. There's like, it's at specific positions. It's like junglers and tops and supports and like, that's about it because everyone else is importing the hard carries from Korea, right? Yeah. And I don't think that's necessarily where you want it to go, and it could become a big problem down the line.
Well, it is time to go into the questions from the Twitch chat. So if you have a question, go ahead and drop it in there. Again, if you're watching the VOD or something like this, we stream every week, 2 p.m. PST. So you can ask your own question.
Or you can tweet at Travis Gafford.
No, I mean, people could tweet at me, but that's not,
Travis always answers
your question.
Them.
Do I?
He's not going to answer your question.
Yeah. All right. Whatever. So this kind of plays off of our last conversation. First question is from Snafu66, who says, "Will Golden Glue ever succeed?"
Define succeed.
Well, certainly what he's doing right now hasn't been success. So
can he not do this in the future?
Can he stay a full split on an LCS team? Maybe like that's.
Yeah, I believe that can happen. I don't know how you guys feel.
Is anybody going to?
I actually think it could. I mean, I think like so. Do I think he played well? No. Do I think all of TL's problems were because of him? Definitely no. And I think it's kind of unfair that he got scapegoated for it. That being said, he needs a team that has probably a bit stronger side lanes just so that they would be able to draw pressure. And then he just needs to learn a few like ins and outs of mid, not necessarily like 1v1 trading. I don't see him going in and being like this super, like people point to Jensen and they're like, oh man, he can, just stomp people in lane in the 1v1. Like, I don't see that. But if he picks up, I guess, a couple of vision cues and is able to work really well with this jungler, I think he could be a fine mid on an ALCS team.
Will anybody ever believe in him, though?
Interesting to see him on a team as a sub for a strong mid lane for a while and then learn the role better, or on a team with a staff that knows how to develop mid laners, because I'm not convinced Teal has one right now. But there's so I think like some of this, like his gaps are not mechanical necessarily. Yeah. I think they're mostly about like how to trade in certain matchups, where should I be on the map right now,
mentality as well. He's had that kind of mentality issues and choking, that kind of stuff. Not necessarily. I think just like to your point about the TL, like or like how he needs like strong side lanes. I think like in theory, TL's roster should have been that, where you have like, we're gonna have one of the most bot lane dominant carries in Piglet, and then he just died in lane over and over. Like the whole team just like kind of made sense if everything worked out, and then nothing worked out, and they became the worst team in the league almost.
One of my most successful memes this weekend was Team Liquid saying that bot lanes can't carry anymore, and then meanwhile Fnatic's drafts. Okay, let's go.
And Doublelift. He kind of carried them.
and Arrow. Okay.
Calm down, Kelsey. Anteaters 1 says, "Would Mark be willing to be an analyst again?"
Next question.
What, really?
I mean, it's a complicated one because like every split I receive job offers to return, and
boom, there's the headline. Zareen,
I feel like that should not be shocking whatsoever.
Zareen, if you are watching this, we need a news write-up right now.
Yeah, so every off season I've had offers, and every time I like weigh them versus what I'm doing right now, and like what I enjoy doing, because I'm not like a very financially driven person.
Okay, so money is not a factor.
No, money is a factor, but it's like I can make twice as much money going back. Do I want to go back right now and be willing to sacrifice how much I enjoy my week?
Right. And how much you enjoy doing League Weekly with Kelsey, Emily, and Travis.
Yeah, that's more of the financial decision.
Oh, okay. Wow. So the
answer is like maybe.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, if maybe Riot decides like, all right, we're gonna, you know, not use you anymore, and then that's like a huge part of my income right now.
But they're using you more than they ever have. But the split, because you did collegiate stuff for them and
right?
Like,
but I mean,
seems like you're
fair, if they like
work.
took me off the analyst desk and LCS and were like, all right, you're the challenger guy now, I'd be like, see ya.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, probably.
But there's no sign that that's going to happen anytime soon.
Nope, not right now.
Yeah. That's just how desperate they are for talent. Let's go to another question. All right, here we go. Unite 14 says, as I paste this in so we can get on the lower third, is Doublelift the best ADC next split, or is it still Arrow? I know my answer, but I'm going to let you guys answer this one first.
Why don't you go, Travis? Blow my mind here.
Yeah.
Show me that you're not the same person.
Listen, there's a man who has been in solo queue all split long, just training. All right, he took the split off, or he went to Worlds last year, bombed out. This is my story, right? This is like, okay, I don't watch anime, but I assume this is how like an anime style.
We're gonna cut here and we're gonna start on the analysis.
So Doublelift,
what I think is
starts off all powerful.
There's a world
like
where Doublelift comes back and performs better because TSM are a better team than P1, and I think he's a little bit more lane dominant than Arrow is with a better support. Currently, like assuming P1's roster doesn't change, so I can see a world where Doublelift comes back and he beats bot lanes harder, and then he performs fine in team fights, and TSM's a better team, and in that regard, you can say Doublelift perform better than Arrow, but I wouldn't say he's going to just be a better AD carry.
Yeah, Arrow is kind of a weird, like, so I've been watching Arrow for a really long time, and it's really funny to see like people peg him as kind of a more lane dominant carry now that he's in North America, because like I don't know if how much people know about Arrow, but like he was a Draven one trick, and then he was constantly ripped apart because he could only play Kog'Maw, and then he was constantly ripped apart because he could only play Sivir. And so basically,
I'm not the only person who liked his Ezreal, but let's go.
His Ezreal was always fine, but like I'm talking about the general narrative of like how people approached Arrow in Korea, right? Is he was just this, everyone kind of saw him as a very weak laner, but someone who could go off in team fights. He himself joked in an interview that I love to bring up that like he told OGN like, oh, we'll probably be okay if I manage to hit my minions, like basically making fun of himself for how bad his laning was. And that slowly improved actually just throughout last year. So like towards the end of 2015, beginning of 2016. And then he got to this point in the playoffs and in the gauntlet, which they failed to win, where he was just like going off on Jhin to the point where people were like, holy crap, that Jhin, where did he come from? Like, where was this Arrow all along? And then he comes to NA and has like a really dominant season. So in terms of better AD carry, I think Arrow's strengths will always be his team fighting. I think his laning has improved significantly, but I think Doublelift is a lot more of a laning focused carry, just in terms of mindset.
Right, like Doublelift.
So, I mean, it'll be really interesting, in my opinion.
Because it doesn't just come down to like raw mechanics and like how you play matchups. In a competitive setting, being lane dominant means you demand resources. It doesn't just mean that like, I'm going to trade you constantly. It's like, I'm going to trade you constantly, get you low, and tell my jungler to come down here in a minute, and we're going to set up a dive or a gank or something like that. And I think, I don't know Arrow super well, but I know Doublelift. I know that's like kind of how he approaches. He's a very vocal player, and so
he's just sort of controlling Biofrost and
no, not like that.
No, I mean to some extent, yes. Though.
Well, he wants to play the lane a certain way for the most part.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Arrow's that same way, and if TSM look anything like they did in summer last year, then I think it's a lot of people would say Doublelift look better than Arrow this year. So can
I tell my abridged Doublelift story? All right, so it starts off, and like the movie begins, right? It's like a superhero movie, and Doublelift at the beginning. No. Hey, and Doublelift, like you see him, he's at Worlds, everything's going great, and then suddenly failure, like he falls, and loses, and he has to he's cast out and goes to solo queue, NA solo queue, and everyone wonders, is it just done, But then he starts to build his path forward, and he's like making all this, and just when he thinks it's all done, like the worst team in NALCS calls him up and is like, Doublelift, we need you.
I feel
and he's like, I don't know if I'm ready for this.
No one ever thought he was done.
And now he's building back. It's creative license. Okay, then now he joins this team, and like, oh my gosh, he survives, and then suddenly in a little bit, Andy, his old guy, is going to be like, listen, I know things didn't go well last time, but I think we need you. You know, he joins in. Wild Turtle, I think lots of conversation about what's going to happen there, and then they win Worlds.
There's a man.
Doublelift wins Worlds.
The IV from his
I was gonna say
arm, and he rushes to the playoff stage, and no, he rushes to MSI in Brazil. Rush processes the visa, okay, and he rushes to MSI in Brazil and says, "TSM needs me.
TSM needs me."
Yeah. See,
there's a man you need to meet, and his name is Sancho Travis.
Oh yeah. I've heard it. He was the one that wrote the girlfriend thing, right?
No, that's Aaron.
Really good
no.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
That is a good.
He's the best storyteller ever.
Yeah.
I don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah. You had never heard about the Sanshao thing?
Well, what is the Sanshao thing?
I'm Kelsey, explain it.
You may have heard the Crumbs thing, but Crumbs basically licensed the Sanshao girlfriend thing.
Yeah, it was like the Western remake of the Sanshao girlfriend epic. The Crumbs girlfriends are ruining LCS thing.
Like a half-hour, very elaborate story,
like super flowery language. Like
it's a LPL thing.
Yeah, I got you.
Are bad, and how he doesn't let EDG players have girlfriends.
And he was a manager, right, or owner?
He was a manager. Yeah. Now he's doing some weird mobile game thing.
Yeah, I actually read that interview. Now I think about it.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
He went, and he was like, one of my favorite parts was where he was like, this one person was like, Sanshao, I've always admired you. And he asked for my WeChat, right? She asked for my WeChat, and she sent me a message. She was like, Sanshao, I've always admired you. Can I have Clearlove's contact?
That's amazing. That's amazing. That's amazing. And I don't want to admit that's happened to me before with Peter.
Speaking of, I need his number.
League of Phantom. Next question. League of Phantom asks, how does TSM do at MSI with Turtle? I love this question, by the way.
I know all the teams at MSI right now.
Yeah.
So they're going to have these great matchups.
I mean, the best part is we're assuming
matchups.
TSM is going to MSI too, by the way, which is great. Like, we haven't even gotten to the semis, and like, this is just, you could tell the TSM fanboys in chat, and why I picked this is because it's just like, yeah, I mean, how's TSM going to do it?
Well, the teams that have qualified thus far are Rampage, Red Canids. Like, there's only 4 teams locked in for MSI, and they're all wildcard teams.
I was about to say, they don't even necessarily make it.
For those of you who don't know, there was an unaired pilot of League Weekly where we discussed
we don't talk about that.
Whether or not NA is in trouble internationally. They don't want me to bring it up.
It was Mark's topic.
And I believe the general consensus was yes.
Yes, they are.
Okay. Let me grab another question.
I like how Travis grabs a troll question. He's like, man, I can't believe that didn't fill more time. I got to find another question already.
I thought you guys were going to talk about TSM for another half
I am
hour.
surprised sometimes at how quickly. Okay, Shadow Chaz coming back. He says, do you think Peanut is the best option as the starter for SKT, or do you think Blake's progression is enough to win the starting spot?
Ooh,
Emily, this is like a good one for you to start off.
I like this question.
Yeah, I knew you would.
So I think...
I like the Doublelift one more.
Of course you do. It's not about Korean junglers.
Yeah, I don't... are those junglers? I don't even...
Anyway.
Isn't that from an anime blank?
So last year, there was this whole thing where I actually defended Blank on numerous occasions because I felt like they were trying to fit him into a Bengi-shaped hole that just didn't ever really work. So basically, they were trying to
really? That's what you went with that? Okay. Mark is doing everything he can to hold it in.
I don't know, man. Yeah.
I know. Basically, they were trying to turn him into Bengi, and he's not Bengi. And so it lost all of the things that made him Blank and turned him into this really bad version of Bengi. And so, especially towards the end of the split where they started subbing Bengi in again, there was this huge issue where everyone was like, get Blank out of here, he sucks. And now this season, interestingly enough, Peanut comes onto the team. So super, this like hyper aggressive jungler that if anyone watched the Rocks Tigers, he was like a super, I don't even know how to describe it. Like, he just had this like multiple highlight reels of all his crazy aggressive plays. And so with Huni in the top lane and Peanut in the jungle, everyone was expecting that SKT are going to be this like super divey, like early game team. And Peanut really hasn't looked as good with SKT. And here comes Blank with 100% win rate when they've subbed him in, which I believe is a total of 8 games, if I'm not mistaken. And so now the question is like, well, like now we have Peanut, but Blank's performing better. I think that I'm really happy that Blank has been given his time to kind of be himself while also doing what the team wants him to do, which is basically he's become more of a mid-focused jungler, again, around Faker. I think that another thing with Peanut is that he had a lot of issues on the Tigers, but because the Tigers were so good at initiating and then following up on each other's CC in skirmishes and team fights, I think that did negate a lot of Peanut's weaknesses, a lot of which involve around vision control, risky invades, kind of giving... Like, when he goes to get pressure for his team, he might not always realize what he's giving up. So I think those are a lot of the problems that we're seeing with Peanut right now. I think Peanut has started to improve with the team. They've integrated him a bit more. I would actually like to see Blank, though. I think he's been playing really well. I don't know if Kelsey disagrees with me because she kind of had, like, a sharp intake, but...
No, I said yes.
Oh, okay.
There.
Like,
Very good.
I always have like a short narrative where it's like the reason why SKT played Blank against Royal is because he was in the same organization as MLXG in China and he understood him. He was like in the mind of MLXG.
Which is really hard to do, to be honest, because I don't even know if MLXG is in his own mind.
Yeah, what mind are you in?
Yeah, I don't think MLXG thinks a whole lot, but, you know, power to him.
Okay, the last question of the show comes from Dr. Bloodvein, who asks, is there a true... You like that name?
No, I think I know who it is.
Oh, okay. I don't... All right. Is there a true second strongest region behind Korea right now?
Oh, God.
I'll just chime in for an NA right here and DQ us.
What?
Yeah, we're just DQ'd.
I'm un-DQing us. North America, at least, okay, if Doublelift was already on TSM, when they get to MSI, we'd obviously be at least the second strongest.
No, so I think, just to kind of say what we said last time we did this about North America, is that as much as we like talking about the parity and how much better as a whole NA looks, I think the top end has definitely come down, and that's kind of unarguable at this point, where C9, the team that we saw in playoffs, towards the end there, once they killed off 2v1s, that's pretty much the same C9 that we're seeing now. The Contracts media swap has not been too big of a deal. Contracts is fine, but he's not like doing anything significantly better. I think he's better in some regards in terms of like some of his mechanical play.
But you remember that whenever NA is talked up a lot, they just flop at international, and whenever they are, everybody's kind of like, then they suddenly do really well.
Whenever. That was like once with CLG at MSI.
Yeah. And exactly, and all the other times, everyone always believed in North America, and they always flopped.
Whatever.
China, we have an expression called poison milk for that.
Oh yeah,
whereas if you say if you say that a team is really, you have to say your favorite team is really bad, otherwise you'll curse them.
Yeah.
If you talk them up, you jinx them.
So what I'd say, anyways,
always known as the G2.
You lost TSM from Summer. They're not the same team right now. They're still good. You lost Immortals from Summer. No one has really taken their place. C9, for the most part, for me, is similar skill level to what we saw at the end of Summer during playoffs. And then CLG is out. They're not going to be there. And then, I mean, maybe you're looking at like, oh, maybe FlyQuest makes a crazy run, but are you really like confident with them going into an international competition? I don't think so. So I think generally NA's top end has come down.
So paraphrase a competitor who's probably still streaming right now. How are you going to know or how's your opponent going to know what you're doing if you don't even know what you're doing?
Get Cutie Pie over there.
Yeah. All right. Very good. So that wraps up our questions.
That's MLXG's approach.
Yeah.
We didn't even answer the question.
We didn't.
I just DQ'd NA.
Yeah, I think my thing is...
Bring the lower third back.
Oh, it's still there.
It's really hard to say.
Yeah, all I was going to say is I think So I was having this conversation the other day, actually. I like comparing teams themselves rather than regional strengths as a whole, just because when
Flash Wolves region is the second best region.
Yeah. And they have to go through the play-in. I'm sorry, NA. Actually, no, you won't have to play.
We're on opposite sides.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you mean you? You're
Oh, yeah.
I am North America.
He is North America.
Wildcard teams. If they both lose to wildcard teams,
then they have to play each other. Oh, that would be interesting. I think that what I'd like to see more people do is evaluate the teams that go to events against the other teams that go to events, which is obviously very difficult to do right now for MSI because, again, we have 4 teams and they're all from...
One of them is TSM, right? We already know.
No.
Okay.
One of them is Red Canids, though. I actually do know a lot about them. But anyway...
That's great.
I know you don't care.
Wrap the thought.
I know.
We're running out of time.
I'll try to talk about Brazil.
Running out of time. Who's the second best region?
That's what I'm saying. I'm not going to say it because I think you should compare. I think we're at a point now where you can compare the top teams from regions against each other rather than talking about the strength of their region.
This is a very resident sleeper answer.
It's the same reason we didn't say how TSM would do at MSI with Doublelift.
Who's the second best region, Kelsey?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. Like after Worlds, I made the video where I said LPL's no longer the second best region, and this annoyed a lot of LPL fans, and I still get yelled at in China for it. But I think it's true. There isn't really one, and it is down to like who are the best teams competing against each other. Because I think you can say that of the top teams in China, NA, and EU, there are worlds where they take games off of each other a lot. So I think it's pretty. All right. That's why I like to do international face-off.
Dr. Bloodvein, the answer is North America. They're not going to give you an answer. They don't want to say it. North America is the second best region. I'm sorry that they won't tell you. And that wraps that question finally. Right? Good? Are we okay? Wraps that question.
Moving on.
Well, we were moving out, actually, because it's the end of the show. It's the end of the show. Is there, let's go ahead and do some goodbyes and some shout outs or anything like that. Mark, anything you want to say? All I know is that you do dumb videos with that guy from All Chat.
Yep, there'll probably be some more dumb videos this week. If you like those, you can follow my Twitter to find them. Also probably doing a little bit more.
What is your Twitter?
At the Mark Z with 2 E's in the. I got some crap on that for Reddit. Apparently that's conceded to make your name that. But anyways, I'll also be doing a couple more analysis pieces. I tried to put one out last week about reviewing my power rankings, but the audio was messed up. But I'll be putting out more stuff in general because I'm done with the collegiate and challenger scene now. So
yeah,
follow the Twitter for any updates on that stuff.
Emily?
I have a whole bunch of articles coming out. I have LCS interviews from this weekend. I have a bunch of Korea articles, a few long form things. Kelsey and I are doing our returning to more playoff matches videos this week, so you can look forward to those as well.
Making the rounds.
Yes.
Okay. I actually thought of that name.
Kelsey? Wait, actually,
yes,
Kelsey,
so
I heard what you originally wanted to make the name of that feature. Somebody messaged me and said, Kelsey wants to call this, I'm just going to say it. What it was?
Two girls, one show.
Two girls, one show.
I tweeted it. So,
yeah.
Okay.
Which was not, we were told was not work appropriate.
Yes.
Why? Can someone explain why?
No.
Kelsey, do you want to give any shout outs to yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fantastic. No. So more articles this week on Europe and China mostly. I might do some other stuff. So, but yeah, it'll be fun.
Well, for me, I would recommend everybody go watch Moon Rising, which is a feature that we made on Moon. It took a long time to make, and I think it is maybe one of the best pieces of content that we've put out. I really enjoy it because, I don't know, I just you learn a lot about Moon as a person and sort of his backstory.
Pretty relevant now that they just won in a comeback victory, mostly off the back of Moon.
Yeah, we put it out last Friday, but talks a lot about his personal life. Parents got divorced when he was younger, didn't know if anything was going to ever happen, and kind of fell into this whole thing. But I highly recommend it. It's really good. Other than that, if you're a fan of Smash Scene, go back and watch some of our Smash Rivalry stuff.
I'll be
really
doing
happy. Really happy with how that all came out. And finally, I want to thank everyone for tuning into our first ever episode of League Weekly. I really enjoyed it. I didn't know if I would, but I did. And maybe you did too. If you did, please tell your friends about it, because obviously we kind of quietly launched this just to make sure the tech issues didn't go through. And yeah, we stream every Monday at 2 p.m. PST or PDT, whatever it is. Thanks for watching.